So already, could I remind you to activate your camera, but to also mute your microphone? Chair, I believe everybody present is now everybody expected is now present. Are you ready to start the meeting?
I am, thank you, yes.
Right, can we switch on the webcast, please? No, we're now live, Chair.
Thank you. Over to you then to start us off, please, Andy.
Right, do you want me to go straight into the procedural items, Chair, or do you want to do your opening comments?
I would like you to start as you usually do, please, Andy, with explaining who you are and going through the procedural things.
Right, okay, so I'm Andy Booth from Governance Services. Do you want me to go straight to agenda item 1 then, Chair?
It's okay. We'll start again.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to
you.
this remote meeting of the South and West Plans panel. My name is Caroline Gruen, and I'll be chairing today's meeting. South and West Plans panel deals with applications from the south, northwest, and west of the city. And the aim of the panel is to hear all the relevant information from applicants, members of the public, and council officers to help members of the panel make their decision. I'd like to start the meeting today by confirming that this is the meeting of the South and West Plans panel and it meets the requirements of the council's constitution, even though members of the panel are in remote attendance. Whilst items today will be fully discussed as usual, remote attendance requires a few slight changes as to how I will manage the debate. Therefore, can I ask all attendees to mute their microphones unless I invite them to speak, and that will avoid disruption from background noise. And can all participants please keep their cameras on during the meeting? All participants will be invited to introduce themselves at the start of the public session to make it clear to the public observers who will be involved in the proceedings. And I ask for your assistance and patience while I go through this process. So in order to avoid any disruption to the meeting, should I lose internet connectivity, I propose that we appoint a vice chair who could step in during my absence. And I move Councillor Jules Heselwood, as I always do. She's not on the call, Andy. Are we able to, we are expecting her to join us very shortly. Are we able to elect her in her absence?
I believe so, Chair.
Okay.
Obviously, if she doesn't arrive and you do drop out, then we will have to appoint somebody else. Okay,
so I move Councillor Jules Heselwood and invite another member to second that motion, please. Councillor Hamilton, are you seconding? Thank you very much indeed. So I'll take a vote by assuming your silence as approval. I don't hear anyone. Are there any objectors or any abstentions? Thank you. So can I now invite members and officers to introduce themselves and mute your microphone once you've introduced yourself. We're going in the old alphabetical order as ever. Councillor Anderson, please.
Councillor Barry Anderson, sorry, Councillor Barry Anderson, Adlan Wharfdale Ward.
Thank you. Has Councillor Brooks joined us yet? Not yet.
No, she's not arrived yet, Chair.
Okay. Cute. Councillor Campbell. I'm sure I've seen Councillor Campbell. Yes, there he is. I think you're on mute, Councillor Campbell.
Oh, right. I'll do it all again then, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Councillor Colin Campbell.
Thank you.
We've now got Councillor Brooks on the call, Chair.
Okay, I'll come back to Councillor Brooks. Councillor Finnegan.
I'm Robert Finnegan, a councillor for the Morley North Ward.
And Councillor Heselwood's not with us yet. Councillor Hamilton.
Good afternoon, everyone. Councillor Sharon Hamilton, Meanwood and Moortown Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Reagan.
Good afternoon. Denise Reagan, Councillor for Bermondsey and Richmondale.
Thank you. Councillor Shemilt, please.
Jackie Shemilt, Councillor for Halsford Ward.
And Councillor Ray.
Councillor Paul Ray, representing Hunslet and Riverside Ward.
Thank you. So we're going to go through officers and for brevity, I will use first names if that's all right with you. Steve.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, panel. Steve Butler, Group Manager for South and West and Lead Officer at South and West Plans Panel.
Thank you. David.
David Jones, Team Leader for the East Team.
Carol. I've seen Carol. She is here, isn't she? You there, Carol? I'll come back if you've lost sound. Stuart,
Hi Chair, hi everyone. Stuart Daniel, Principal Planning Officer.
Richard,
Good afternoon, Chair. It's Richard Smith, Principal Planning Officer, South and West Team.
Nicole.
Good afternoon, Chair. Nicole Walker, Legal Advisor to the panel, and also my colleague Nikki Diol in the event I lose connection.
Thank you. Toby.
Good afternoon, Toby Russell, Senior Technical Officer, and in case I lose connectivity, it'll be Lewis Footit as my backup.
And thank you. And Andy, you've already introduced yourself. So can we come back to Councillor Brooks? Would you like to introduce yourself, Councillor Brooks?
Yes, my apologies, Chair. I had a bit of problems getting in, but
okay.
Councillor Kayleigh Brooks, Little London and Woodhouse Ward.
Thank you, Councillor Brooks. It's a hazard of the occupation these days, I'm afraid, isn't it? Losing connectivity. Okay, so moving to the agenda, item number 1, Andy, please.
Right, thank you, Chair. Under agenda item number 1, there are no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Under agenda item number 2, there are no items which require the exclusion of the press and public. Under agenda item number 3, I'm not aware of any late items of business today. Moving on to agenda item number 4, could I ask if members have any disclosable pecuniary interest to declare?
I can't see any, and oh, I do. I can see Councillor Shemilt. You're on mute, Councillor Shemilt.
Pardon. We'll get used to this by the time we're back face-to-face meeting. I don't have any pecuniary interest, but I wish it to be known that I am a member of Rawdon Parish Council that was a consultee on the application on item 10, Micklefield House.
Thank you very much. That's clear. I can't see any more hands, so that's fine. And apologies, Andy, please.
Yeah, with no apologies for absence today, Chair.
It's fine, thank you. So now turning to item number 6, which is the minutes of the previous meeting, the one held on the 28th of January. Do members accept these minutes as a true and correct record? I'm going to assume you've read the minutes, and if there are matters arising, you can let us know which page you'd like us to refer to. So I will assume silence as an accurate record. Are there any matters anyone would like to raise from the minutes? And again, I can't see any indications, so we can take those as an accurate record. Thank you. Item number 7, appeal decision for Sugar Hill Close. Who's taking this one, Steve? Is it yourself?
Chair, it's me, Nicole.
Thank you, Nicole.
Yeah, it's Nicole.
Yeah, good afternoon, members. This is just to give you a summary of the appeal decision in relation to a site at Sugar Hill Close. The appeal against the decision was against the decision of the panel to refuse plan and permission for the demolition of the existing dwellings at Sugar Hill Close and the construction of 70 houses. And the inquiry was held in October 2020. So I appreciate members have had and will have read the report. So I'm just going to briefly summarise some of the main highlights. So the report sets out in paragraph 1 and 2 the refusal reasons for the application, and in summary, the first reason was having regard to the public secretary quality duty. The panel was of the view that the adverse impacts of granting the plan and permission would outweigh the benefits. The adverse impacts would outweigh the benefits of the application. And then the second refusal reason related to, in summary, to garden sizes and that they were deficient. However, this second refusal reason, that was addressed by the appellant prior to the inquiry, and so it didn't need to be dealt with at the inquiry. In addition to the council's attendance at the inquiry, the residents group under the banner of Save Our Homes took full part in the inquiry, and they were separately represented. So the issues considered by the inspector are set out in full in paragraphs between paragraphs 5 and 21 of your report. But again, in short, the issues were, and his conclusions on those issues were, that the proposal complied with the development plan as a whole. The inspector attached significant weight to the loss of the non-designated heritage assets because the homes are airy construction. And also he attached significant weight to the dissipation of the community, which really linked to the panel's concerns and the refusal reason one. He did, however, identify the benefits to be that the houses would be built to modern standards, that have greater energy efficiency. They provided a healthier environment for future residents to live in, that a percentage of the properties were adaptable and accessible, and also they secured much needed affordable housing. In addition, the inspector put great weight on the condition of the existing houses, and that was a key consideration for the inspector when exercising the planning balance. And these, again, the full reasons for that are set out in paragraph 25 of your report. The inspector placed more weight on these matters than the council had and allowed the appeal and granted planning permission. Despite the decision, the inspector did not agree with the appellant that in refusing permission, the local planning authority had behaved unreasonably in defending the appeal. He was of the view that the position taken by the council in respect of the consideration of the development plan, material considerations, the refusal reasons, and the principle of the alternative proposals was not unreasonable behaviour. It did conclude that our general position on assertions in respect of refurbishment was unreasonable, but that did not cost the appellant any wasted expense, and therefore he dismissed the application for costs, and costs against the council were not awarded. So this matter was, as I know panel will appreciate, it was highly fact sensitive, and the circumstances were very unique. And actually, since the decision came out, it's already been the subject of discussion at planning seminars and podcasts and the like. And during those discussions, the unique set of circumstances have actually been acknowledged of the difficulty with the application. So that's a whistle-stop summary, Chair, of that appeal decision.
Very helpful, thank you, Nicole. Can I ask members if they have any questions about that report, please? And I can't see any indications. Anyone want to make any comments or observations about it? No, that was a very helpful explanation. Thank you, Nicole. I think we can move on to the next item, which is item 8, retention of a single-storey extension at 49 Colwyn Road, Beeston. Can I invite David to present on this one, please?
Thank you, Chair. Can we just move to the next slide, please, Toby? Yeah. So this is a site plan. Just to summarise, this is a retrospective application for retention of a single-storey extension. So despite the address that appears on the papers, which is 49 Colwyn Road, the actual proposal is to the Tempest Road frontage, and the house has been knocked through. It was previously 2 back-to-backs, so there's a bit of disparity between what's the front and what's the back. Next slide, please. So you can see from this plan, it shows where it's reported to be a garage on that particular plan originally, which is the one on the left, but it was actually a timber shed from what we understand. And the proposal is outlined in red. So it essentially sits on top of an existing parking space that we have some photographs that will show that better. Next slide, please, Toby. So this is from the Tempest Road frontage. Again, just showing the situation prior to the works that have taken place. So the image on the right is how it appears now. Next slide, please. That's from the Colwyn Road, so you don't really get to see much of it from that particular frontage because it's obviously set well back. Next slide, please. And these are just the 2 side elevations. The one with the window in, just to note, that faces in towards the application site. So the blank gable is the one that faces the neighbouring property. Next slide, please. So here's some site photos. Essentially, the structure there is just to the right of the tree behind the silver car. So it's got a fairly traditional garage roller shutter door, and you can see there it's breeze block construction, and you can just about make out the side window as well. You'll see from the report that it's in an unfinished condition at the moment. It is proposed to be rendered, but that's sort of contextually how it sits in the street. Next slide, please. Again, that's just from the frontage, so you can see how far forward that projects, pretty much to the back edge of the pavement. And you'll see from the recommendation that's one of the significant concerns. Next slide, please. So this is looking up the street. You can see the slope and nature of the street. And one thing to note really from this particular photo and perhaps some of the ones to come is the boundary treatment. This area was subject to environmental improvements. So there is a uniform boundary treatment along the whole of the frontages, and you can just make out, you can see the same boundary treatment on the opposite side of the road. So it has been subject to sort of visual improvements more recently. Next slide, please. So again, that's just really looking in the opposite direction. And again, you can really sort of appreciate from those particular images how far forward this projects from the building line. And you can see it sort of collides almost with the host building. Next slide, please. So this is an image from the Colwyn Road elevation. So again, that just reinforces that within that particular street scene, the building's not prominent at all. So you can just make it out in the background there. Next slide, please. So this is an image sort of just taking a bit more of the street in. So you can just about see the tree, and the garage sits below the spire of the church in the background. Now, obviously, if that was to be rendered, presumably it would be painted to match the property as well. So it'd be white or cream. But you can, again, appreciate sort of the strong building line from that particular image. Next slide, please, Toby. And this is looking down from the street. And you can see from the report, there is reference, particularly from Councillor Iqbal, who's the only person who has commented on the application, and indeed is the reason why this application has been brought to Plans Panel at his request. But these are some of there are some structures that also appear in others' gardens, but they're clearly of a temporary nature. So that's just one image showing them. Next slide, please. And again, that's just highlighting that there are a few examples of what are very much temporary structures, so sheds, etc. Next slide, please. I think that might be it. Yeah. So you'll see it is retrospective, but the officer recommendation is to refuse, and we don't think it's an appropriate form of development within the street scene and the way it links back to the particular property. As I've mentioned, Councillor Iqbal is the only person who's made representations on this. Despite it being situated on a parking space, we haven't sought to advance a highway reason for refusal, primarily because it wasn't available beforehand, and also by not requiring a vehicular access into that space, that frees up space to the frontage. So it's kind of it cancels itself out. But the officer recommendation is to a refusal on design grounds. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And can I now ask the panel if there are any questions you'd like to ask officers about this application? I should say, if you could use your electronic hand, please. We've been doing this for quite some time, but just to remind you, it's in the reactions now rather than the participants. I'm sure you all know that. I can't see any hands going up. Yes, I can. Councillor Campbell.
Just a quick one to try and get visualize it in my mind. So if I look at the photographs, then the entrance to the, well, to all intents and purposes, garage is from Tempest Road and through a roller shutter door. Is that correct?
David?
Yes, that's correct.
And you said that the garage itself is up against the edge of the pavement. So if you were to drive in and out, presumably the sight lines are across the pavement.
They would be, yeah, and the boundary treatments are sort of sufficiently low broadly that you'd have some intervisibility over them as well.
Right, okay.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Colin. Councillor Heselwood, and then I've got Councillor Ray.
Sorry, Chair, I just wanted to let you know that I'm in the meeting. Apologies, I was late. I was on a meeting with the Minister for Women and I wanted to make sure I got my points over while I had the Minister's ear. So apologies, but I am here now.
Okay, thank you for that, Jules. Councillor Ray.
It's really just to ascertain what discussions have been had. If the main objection is over the design, what conversations have been had with the applicant over altering the design to make it acceptable, or is it just an outright in principle refusal from officers?
Thank you.
Yeah, I think on this particular one, ultimately the site under the building is fundamentally the issue in terms of how prominent it is within the street scene. So clearly it does need to be, if it was to be approved, it would need to be rendered. That would offer some improvement. And indeed the applicant has indicated that that's what he intends to do. But ultimately that doesn't overcome our concerns. So it's an in principle objection to this particular proposal.
Okay, I can't see any more questions.
If I can just come back, sorry,
Oh,
Chair. Okay.
yes, yeah, you can indeed, and I can now see Councillor Hamilton's waiting as well. Paul first.
Yeah, thank you for that, Chair. I mean, I suppose my question is, and like I say, I've not really looked at this one overly because with it being in the ward, and I've allowed Councillor Iqbal to raise his own objection. But I suppose my question is, there are a lot of temporary structures down that road, which presumably would have needed some form of planning permission. So isn't there not an inconsistency there in terms of objection to this compared to that? I'm trying to understand the legal basis for the objection, if that makes sense, when there are a lot of other similar temporary structures, maybe not to the same scale, similar temporary structures.
Yeah, essentially we've received, and the reason for this planning application follows on from an enforcement investigation. So somebody has reported it to the council, and off the back of that, they've sought to regularise the situation with a planning application. Unfortunately, it's one that we don't think we can support as officers, certainly. In terms of the other examples within the street, I think most people will agree that they don't look particularly great. They won't have planning permission. We haven't necessarily looked into the details as to how long they've been there, for example. So some could have been there for over 4 years and be immune, for example. So I guess we've just dealt with this particular application. We don't think the presence of those other structures justifies supporting what we consider to be unacceptable development. If a takeaway message from this is we should, as an authority, look further into those other structures because of the impact they also have, we can certainly look to do that.
Thank you. Are you okay with that, Councillor Ray, or do you want to come back?
I just wanted to come back to that because it's one of these is the kind of the horse kind of already bolted situation, and I suppose in terms of potentially the applicant maybe appealing this, and I don't know what conversations it had as I stayed away, so I'm impartial in all this. Is there a potential that the inconsistency of enforcement across the rest of that street, whether they're enforceable or not now, would actually put the applicant in a position that if they were to appeal, they would have a relatively strong case to say, well, the rest of the street hasn't been done. And this is what I'm just trying to understand. Are we setting ourselves up for an appeal, basically, where actually our arguing point's quite weak?
I think ultimately, as a retrospective application, if planning permission is refused, applicants are always minded to appeal, because you just would do, because the alternative is to remove it. I think ultimately we've got adopted guidance and policies that are in place that indicate that this isn't a form of development that should be supported. As with an awful lot of development, sort of the similar proposals elsewhere are often used to justify more of the same. And to be honest, we do look to resist that, because otherwise you don't secure any improvements. And ultimately each application is considered on its own merits. So we would certainly look to fight this. No doubt the applicant would reference them, but we don't think that warrants supporting this particular proposal.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you, Chair. And just to say, I think Councillor Ray's asked what I was going to ask, really. But I was saying, asking about the other structures. You said that they're temporary. Are they breeze blocked or just wooden? And is this setting a precedent? So, for example, if we grant this, the others can remove their temporary structure, as you call it, and apply.
David?
Yeah, this is specifically referenced in the report, that actually clearly some of these occupiers have a desire to provide additional sort of built development within their curtilage. At the moment, that's largely being done by fairly lightweight, easily removable sheds, or some of them are metal structures. I think if this particular application was to be supported, that would kind of potentially open the doors for more permanent structures, more of the same. And I think, that's not something we think should be encouraged. Hence the officer recommendation to refuse.
You okay with that response, Sharon, or do you want to come back?
No, I'm happy
You're
with
all right.
that.
Okay, well, I can't see any more hands, so we will go to comments. If I'd like to take comments from people or views, please. And I can't see anybody coming forward. Oh, yes, I can. Councillor Shemilt, please.
Remember to unmute this time. Just a couple of observations. I totally take the point about creating a precedent. I mean, I could choose to ignore that, but we're not comparing like with like here, because these are two back-to-backs that have been knocked through. So unless the other houses in the streets concerned have done similarly, then we're not comparing like with like. And in this case, although it doesn't make an awful lot of difference, they have put this structure over a parking space. But I can see that what could happen, but this is speculation only, is that in future anybody else applying would want to put a more permanent structure instead of a shed, but potentially that could increase the amount of on-street parking, which looks as though it's under strain as it is. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Any further comments, please? Okay, well, I think we can. Is there anybody who is prepared to propose the recommendation?
I'll propose it, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. Do I have a seconder, please?
Happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Finnegan. So we're now going to go to the vote. So if you could, as I go down you in alphabetical order again, if you could indicate whether you are for the recommendation or against the recommendation being to refuse, please. Councillor Anderson.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Brooks.
In favour, Chair.
Councillor Campbell.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Finnegan.
In favour.
Councillor Hamilton.
Support the recommendation.
Councillor Hesselwood.
In favour of the recommendation, Chair.
Councillor Reagan.
In favour of the recommendation, Chair.
Councillor Shemilt.
For the recommendation.
Councillor Ray.
In favour.
And I'm in favour too. So I think that was unanimous, Andy. If you just want to sum up for the record, please.
Yes, Chair. All members present were in favour of the officer recommendation to refuse.
Thank you very much indeed. Steve, would you like to sum up briefly for us? Thank you.
Yeah, the application has been refused as per the officer recommendation. We'll pass it to enforcement to seek its removal.
Thank you very much indeed. So can we now go on to the next item? Can you just remind me who's presenting this one, please?
Yeah, sorry, Chair, it's me, Stuart Daniel.
Thank you, Stuart. Can we go on to the next item, please?
Thank you, Chair. So the application relates to an outline proposal for residential development at land off Oldfield Lane in Wortley. At this stage, the matters for consideration by members is the principle of development and access into the site, with all other matters reserved for a future application. The applicant for this application is Leeds City Council, and the proposal will be to deliver 100% council housing on the site. Next slide, please, Toby. Thank you. So this slide shows the red line boundary of the site, which measures 1.7 hectares in total and is allocated for housing within the adopted SAP. For information, there are site requirements within the SAP that require any development to provide on-site green space to link up with the existing green space to the north, which is just beyond the red line boundary, to provide a green link from Oldfield Lane to the green space, and local improvements to existing sports facilities within the local area. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is an overhead image to show the site in context. The application site is located at the bottom centre of the image, to the left of the Asda store. Residential properties are located to the south, west and east of the site, with existing green space to the north, beyond the tree belt that is shown in the image. Footpath connections exist between Malmesbury Place to the top right of the site to Oldfield Avenue to the left. This footpath also connects to a route going north through this existing green space. Next slide, please. So this is a wider overhead shot with the application site located towards the top left of the image. Toward the right is Wortley Recreation Ground, which is the closest allocated green space for the development and is approximately a 3-minute walk from the site to the entrance on Oldfield Lane. Next slide, please. So these two photos are taken from Oldfield Lane, looking at the site at the point where the vehicular access is proposed. The second photo is taken in the same location, but is looking slightly toward the right, towards the Asda store, which you can see. Next slide, please. So the photo to the left is taken from the Malmesbury's, which is to the right of the application site, with the gap in the wall evident in the top corner, which allows access onto the site, as well as to the footpath that runs to the north. The photo to the right is taken from Oldfield Lane, looking left toward the western boundary. The building that can be seen, you can just make out the building in the image, is vacant but will be demolished as part of any redevelopment. Next slide, please. So the left photo is again taken from Oldfield Lane, but is looking to the east towards the existing dwellings within the Malmesbury's. The right-hand photo is taken from Oldfield Avenue to the west of the site and shows the area of hard standing within the site that was associated with its former use. Next slide, please. So this final photo is again taken from Oldfield Avenue, and it is to show that there is a difference in levels between the application site and Oldfield Avenue. You can just make out the shrubs in the tree. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is a submitted block plan, which shows the vehicular access to the site located in the bottom left of the plan, adjacent to the pub. Given that this is an outline application, there is limited information provided. However, what this does show is how the site requirements for the SAP could be accommodated within the site, with the lighter colour indicating the green link and on-site green space, and the darker colour indicating potential development areas. Members do have a full report in front of them. However, the main points for consideration on this application is the principle of development and vehicular access to the site. In terms of the principle, the site is allocated for housing, and as such, officers consider that there are no planning reasons not to support the principle. Conditions are to be attached to any approval which deals with matters relating to accessible homes, space standards, housing mix, environmental policies, and the matters relating to the specific site requirements. With regard to vehicular access, this has been assessed by the highways officer and there have been no concerns raised. The required visibility displays can be achieved and are shown on the block plan. Internal roads and accesses will be dealt with on a subsequent reserved matters application, and as such there are no highways objections to the proposal. Sport England have raised an objection to the proposal. However, they also recognise that they are not a statutory consultee in line with the Development Management Procedure Order, given that the last official use of the site as sports facilities is in excess of 10 years. As such, and in light of the site allocation, officers do not consider that objection raised alters the view with regard to the principle of development on this site, or housing development on this site. It is also recognised that a significant level of representation has been received to the application. However, a large majority of these relate to the principle of development, which has been mentioned earlier, is been well established through the SAP and is now a housing allocation. Other material comments raised have been robustly covered within the report. Finally, just to update members, we have received comments from Leeds City Council Education team who'd say the development would yield approximately 15 primary and 6 secondary school pupils in total. This is considered to be a very low yield and which can be accommodated within the schools nearby. Recently as well, we've received 3 objections from the ward members with the points raised relating to the amount of green space within the ward and how this has been calculated during the SAP, the lack of school places, the need for highway improvements to surrounding roads to cope with the additional traffic, concern about providing a footpath onto the Marms Bridge due to antisocial behaviour, and a gas pipe that runs through the site. All comments have been addressed within the report, and the gas pipe referred to is actually located within the road of Oldfield Avenue and doesn't run through the site. 3 additional letters of objection have been received in the past couple of days, which raised no new material planning considerations. Comments relating to legal covenants or the sale of the land are not material in the assessment of this application.
Chair, just on that latter point, could I just invite Nicole Walker to see whether she would like, from Legal Service, to see whether she'd like to add anything on that particular point, just so members are clear, because it is quite a key issue that has been raised by residents, although not germane to this application. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Nicole. If you'd like to do that for us, please.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, just to confirm that in relation to this site, there are no covenants on the land that relate to anything to do with retaining sports pitches or open space or of that kind of nature. So even if there were covenants, it wouldn't be relevant for your planning considerations, but I can clarify that there are no such covenants.
Thank you, Nicole. So Steve, just back to you for a moment then, just to totally clarify with members what we are here to make a decision on and what we can reasonably take into account.
It's purely on the application for use of the land for residential, as has been said quite clearly by Stuart. It's a SAP allocation, therefore the principle of development has been accepted previously. So it's purely on the basis of the outline application in front of you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And we do have some speakers on this item. Mr. John Turner, I think, first, speaking in objection to the application. Is Mr. Turner with us? I think Andy's letting him in, is he?
He doesn't appear to be on the call at the moment, Chair.
Ah, right. So if he's not with us, do we have Miss O'Keefe? Claire O'Keefe. Hello.
Yeah, yes, Claire's on the call.
Claire's here, but we definitely don't have a Mr. Turner here. So again, I just need some advice, please, Mr. Butler. If we only have the one speaker, can the one speaker have 4 minutes? Or I know originally the two speakers were going to split the time between the two of them, 2 minutes each.
It's your discretion, Chair, but I suspect Claire O'Keefe is actually prepared for the 2 minutes, so she may not need the time.
Yes, but in effect, if we offer Mrs. O'Keefe, sorry to talk about you in the third person when you hear Claire, my apologies. If the other speaker turns up, that means he couldn't speak. Is that correct?
Well, it's at your discretion, Chair,
Okay.
Because the circumstances are unusual, aren't
Okay,
they?
they are.
Remote, so.
Right, Claire, would you like to use a full 4 minutes since we seem to have that time available for you?
Yes, please.
Okay, that's absolutely fine. So in your own time, you will be cut off after the 4 minutes, then I will obviously allow you to complete the sentence that you're on.
Oh,
Okay, in your own time when you're ready.
Okay, I'm Claire O'Keefe, a retired children's centre teacher, passion for outside play. I've worked for my life at Leeds City Council. I've always believed in the principles of Leeds City Council, but this matter has challenged me. So the opposition, I want to first direct you to Councillor Anne Fossey's objection, because in there she clarifies the details of the deficiency of sports provision in the area regarding Sport England's objection. So this is not about not wanting social housing. The community know that Wortley High School playing field was sold quite recently and it's sold to private developers. That makes us upset. You've got a big parcel of land, 88 million, something like that, where social housing could be built. In the audit of Green Spaces 2017 in the pre-planning documents, which were based on data from 2014, now 2021 and population has increased. So a lot of Leeds wards are going to be deficient in green spaces. So we established with the council's chief executive that due to an error in this paper, Farley and Wortley ward is massively deficient in outdoor sports provision by around 6 hectares or more, that's about 15 acres. The chief executive stated to us in this error will be amended in future documents. Armley also borders our playing field and is similarly deficient. You're proposing to destroy our heritage playing field that has been in the heart of West Leeds since 1857. It was threatened by development in 1928 and the people of Leeds raised money to buy it. It was and is held in trust. Without going into details on the legalities, the proposals to build on it are unethical, immoral, and probably more. We are told that the lack of pitches in Leeds is being addressed by the Park Life project, providing out-of-town 3G pitches. It's suggested that profits from the sale of our historic playing field will be put into this pot of money. That's money going around in a circle. And what Sport Leeds is saying in their submission is, sell off your local sports ground that's been used for 170 years in the middle of the community, where young people are safe and go unaccompanied, and where local teams could play and train and instead somehow travel to a big centre on the opposite side of Leeds and book a space. There are not covenants on the land, but there are trust deeds, constitutions and other documents, the lease, in which it is said that Leeds City Council will claim this playing field with no money exchange hands, as long as they keep it as a playing field. Okay, that's clear. I'm going to quote from Sport Lead again. The Oldfield Lane site as a single pitch facility, it's not a single pitch. There's very limited access, so I build there, and opportunities for development, serious health and safety failings, and serious vandalism. That raises a big flag to me about provision for young people in this area. There's space for a range of indoor and outdoor activities, and a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to provide a much-needed focus for the Wortley community. Our playing field is in use now, it's in daily use. And we have provided evidence of Sport England's of football matches being played. And that grass you saw, that's been done by the community, by old ladies like me with the lawnmowers on there restoring the pitch. It's the best trained football pitch in Leeds. People are angry that the trustees neglected it. There are 6 netball courts. We'd like to restore them and the community are up for that. Neglecting a site to provide an argument for selling it should not be an action that is rewarded. There's been huge stress on this community over this in difficult times. We've never said no to anything before, but now in unison we fight for Wortley and it's really hard. 3 times the local community has been consulted on this and on each occasion has said no. Its views should be heeded. Here's a statement. For people living in the most deprived communities in Leeds to have the opportunity to contribute to, be valued by, and be involved with where they live. For these communities to recognise their assets, forge strong, meaningful connections with one another, feel able to make the changes they want to see in relation to living in a physically active place. Learning from
Oh, yeah, that's your time. Do you want to finish the sentence you were actually in the middle of?
It's actually your document. But the learning from these communities is shared with the rest of the city so that other people can start to lead a more active life too. That statement comes from Leeds City Council's own report, September 2019.
Thank you. I'm now going to invite members of the panel to ask you if they have any questions of you, Claire. So members of the panel, any questions? Councillor Finnegan.
Is there anything else that you think we should be taking into account at this particular point, Claire?
There probably are a lot of things, but as you can tell, I'm quite rattled. I think you need to take into account that the community has taken this playing field back into a playing bus situation, which is phenomenal considering the circumstances we're under at this moment, and that we are playing matches on it at the moment, and it is a really good football pitch, and those netball courts are amazing.
Thank
and
you.
Actually, there's a car park. Sorry.
That's okay. I think we've got the picture there, Claire.
Okay.
Councillor Hesselwood.
Yes, thank you. Claire, just a couple of questions. I understand from speaking to local residents that during the pandemic and the lockdowns we've had, the local community have very much taken this land back into their own, if you like, and they've been doing a lot of cleaning and clearing and, as you say, mowing the grass. And I understand that it's now, although it hasn't been used officially for sports for about 10 years, it's now been used for informal sports for children, so not maybe an organised football team, but there are games going on there, and well, not at the moment, but in between lockdowns it has been, and also people are using it for their daily exercise as well. I'd just like you to comment on that. And my other comment is that my question, it borders Armley, and I think from memory we only have one park in Armley, and this borders Armley ward, so I'd just like to know your thoughts on that, please.
So in terms of current use, we had a football match there last year. It was informal, but we raised £1,000 for a little boy to buy him a new wheelchair. So we've made incredible good use of it. We do have a local park called Wortley Rec, but it's now called New Wortley Recreation Ground. There are pitches there, but they're rather poor condition. And this is where the error has been made by Leeds City Council. Armley, where my grandchildren live, chronically deficient in outdoor sports provision and in a number of other typologies of green space as well. New Wortley, which is part of Armley Ward, is one of the most efficient areas in all green spaces in Leeds and has only really the big cemetery to speak for it. So in actual fact, there are, in all surrounding areas, there is a need for more sports provision, particularly for our young people. Does that answer your question? Sorry.
Thank you.
I can't see the screen.
Councillor Anderson, please.
Claire, as a local resident, we appear to be looking at the issue as a green space issue or much needed council housing. Where do you stand on the balance between the two of them?
I want to see more council housing in Leeds, but that isn't really an argument for destroying sports provision for children. We already have slightly more council housing in this ward than other wards in Leeds and the national average. And there's a lot of poverty deprivation. If you look on the, your data website, there's lots of indicators. Less car ownership. Only half the families in Armley have a car. Only a third of the families in Wortley have access to a car. We've got Wortley Recreation Ground with the pitches on it. Behind there is a great fall of land facing the south. Brilliant for compact eco housing. At the same time, you could drain those pitches, which are terribly boggy, and put in a ground source heat pump. Marvellous project for Leeds, real flagship project. There are solutions to this problem that we want to work with the council on. That belt of housing behind, maybe there could be some disabled bungalows there. There's room for a block of flats at the back of the site that we can see. We're prepared to explore it. We've got solutions, but we just want to be heard.
Thank you. Are there any more questions, please? Okay, in that case, can I thank you very much indeed for coming and joining us this afternoon and sharing those important thoughts with us. Thank you very much, Claire.
Thank you for listening.
Okay. Now we do have a speaker against. I've actually got 3 names here, so perhaps we could just clarify who it is that's speaking. I know Mark Denton is here for questions. Is it Richard Merrills who is speaking in support?
Yeah, I think it's Laura.
Laura. Is Laura Whitehead here?
Thank you, Chair. That's me.
And you're expecting to speak?
Yeah.
Okay, so you also have up to 4 minutes in your own time, please, Laura.
Thank you, Chair. So my name's Laura Whitehead and I'm the project lead for this scheme in the Council Housing Growth team. I'll be supporting the planning application for the site at Oldfield Lane in the Farnley and Whately ward. Richard Merrills, Director of Watson Batty and Lead Architect for the development, and Matt Denton, Head of Programme in the Council Housing Growth team, are also available to answer any questions that you might have on our proposals. There are 5 key points I'd like to make in support of the application. The first point I'd like to make is with regard to the site allocation. This site has a housing allocation in the Council's Site Allocation Plan, originally identified in 2013 and confirmed in 2019. Our scheme will ensure that all requirements as stipulated within that site allocation plan are addressed. These requirements include providing on-site green space, improving access to and through the site, and making off-site contribution to enhance green space and sports facilities in the ward. The second point I'd like to make is with regard to housing quality. The Council's Housing Growth Programme is something to be proud of. We've set very high standards in terms of build quality, amenities, and creating homes and a place that people can thrive in. The new homes will be highly energy efficient and use alternative energy sources to fossil fuels, which supports our climate emergency aspirations. The homes will exceed the requirements of building regulations and ensure compliance with EN1 and EN2 of planning policy. This will result in the homes having a low carbon impact in the longer term. The third point I'd like to make is with regard to housing need. There remains acute need for good quality, affordable housing for rent across the city. In the Farnley and Whately ward, there is a waiting list of over 500 households seeking a home, and over 100 of those households are in the highest priority bands and desperately need good quality and affordable accommodation. There are no other council-owned sites identified in this part of the city to help address the needs of those families that want to stay in the ward, close to family, friends, and support networks. The fourth point I'd like to make is with regard to consultation. We've ensured extensive pre-planning consultation was carried out, which included direct mail to over 800 households in addition to online consultation material. This enabled local people to comment on our proposals. We recognise that new schemes can create concerns and that objections in relation to the impact of this development have been raised, but we are confident we can address them through our more detailed proposals. We know that there is a support for the scheme as well, which will help bring wider benefits to local green space and sports facilities, and our scheme will ensure we mitigate the concerns around the pressure on infrastructure and transport. The final point that I would like to make is with regard to improvement to green space and access. The development will provide properly laid out and maintained green space, which improve links to and through the site. In addition, there'll be a commuted sum generated to improve other existing local green space and sports facilities nearby. There are a number of established sports clubs within the community, including Whately Juniors, Farnley Falcons and Whately FC. There are 4 football pitches and 1 rugby pitch already available and in use on Whately Recreational Ground, which is very close to the site. The commuted sums generated by this development can attract further match funding to support sports facilities and activities in the ward, and we want to look to develop those moving forward. Our design team, Watson Batty, will be able to provide further information about the principles being adopted to support the planning application if there are any questions from members as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Laura. Could I invite members to ask any questions they would have, please, of Laura Whitehead? And I can't see any hands. I've just got one question, Laura, and you might not be able to elaborate any further. I just wondered if you wanted to say any more about the green space contribution and the form that might take, or that would take, if this development went ahead.
At the moment, Chair, those proposals haven't been fully detailed. We do know there's a lot going on in the ward. As we've mentioned, there's a number of local clubs that are very active in that area, and we know that colleagues with Impacts on Countryside in the authority are working with those clubs, and we would like to continue to work with them and, of course, the local community and ward members to look at how we can maximise the impact of the money that we've got available that's yielded through this development. Mark Denton might be able to add some more to that.
Mark, if you're there, would you like to come forward if you've got a point to make on that? that hasn't already been made?
Thanks, Laura. I think, to be honest, Laura's made the points, Chair. Thanks.
That's fine. Thank you. Councillor Anderson, please.
Yeah. I don't know whether this will actually fall to Laura or whether another officer should actually be answering this particular question. But you've come forward with an outline only. Why have you not come forward with detailed policies, proposals, etc.? Because that would then have helped to ameliorate the concerns of local residents. And also, I have to say that my things going from outline to reserved matters, in my experience, are just one disaster after another. We give, as a council, outline permission, but then local residents just never get a chance to actually model it when it comes to the reserved matters. So this would have been one way of helping the residents to see what's going to happen. For example, are you sticking rigidly to the Leeds standard? Are you going to be able to produce information to show that EN1 and EN2 are being met? Things around that type of thing. So what was the rationale for not coming forward with a detailed planning application so that we could say yay or nay to the whole proposal, nuts and bolts added to it? And I've got one other question as well about the monies that you mentioned just now. How much are we talking about, and what discussions have you had with ward members about the benefits that can come along with this development?
Laura,
Chair,
would you prefer? Who's speaking? Sorry, I've lost you.
Sorry, Chair, it's Mark Denton, the head of programme.
I was going to say, I think you might have been better placed to answer those questions, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Anderson. I think one of the things that the reason for bringing an outline application is to establish the principle of development, because clearly it is a site that's of interest, and there are a lot of strong views in terms of how the site is developed in the future. But one thing I do want to kind of stress is that I think we've demonstrated, even through the outline process, that we're absolutely committed to engaging with local residents. There's been extensive community consultation in advance of this outline application, and I'd reassure Councillor Anderson, other members and local residents that we would absolutely continue to work as part of developing our proposals, working with local community and residents and other stakeholders to develop those proposals in detail. So the reason for coming with an outline rather than detailed proposals is to absolutely allow those residents and stakeholder views to be properly taken into account. He did ask rather a lot of questions, Chair, so I'll try and quickly cover some of those, and I think Laura covered those, alluded to those in her statements. The Leeds standard is a long-standing standard that the programme has been built to, but we're also all aware of the climate emergency and the need to accelerate the work that we're doing. So across the programme, the Council Housing Growth team are looking at the alternatives to traditional kind of gas central heating, gas boilers, and we're already submitting planning applications on other sites with district heating schemes to provide highly energy efficient homes. So again, I would reassure him that those proposals and across the whole design and quality standards that we aim to achieve will be shared with people as part of developing the next stage. So we don't intend to go from here and then just turn up again at reserved matters and seeking approval. We'll be working, as we always do, with local members and the local community. Briefly on local members, we've briefed them on a number of occasions. We've talked to them quite a lot about how this development will benefit wider sports and green space facilities. They're very keen to involve local residents as well in terms of coming up with ideas, and our pre-planning consultation sought ideas on that. So again, would kind of emphasize and reiterate, we very much try and work with people. We understand it often that there are very kind of challenging conversations to have, so we'll do that. And sorry, the last question, because there were quite a few, it was about was it to do with the money to do with the green space, wasn't it? I don't think there was a separate funding issue, but have I covered everything, Councillor Anderson?
Councillor Anderson, do you just want to clarify what your last point was?
It was the commuted sums,
Commuted sums,
that
yes.
Laura mentioned in her presentation. What are they and what are they going to be used for?
Can you address that, Mark, or not at this stage? It's up to you.
Well, I think, as Laura said, that will be developed as part of getting the detailed scheme, and that will help define the actual amount of monies involved. But it's the SAP allocation for the site as a housing site is very clear in terms of what it says that the site should aim to do in terms of promoting improvements to green space and sports facilities. So at this stage, that's what I can say, Councillor Anderson, it will absolutely go towards benefiting those. And as Laura said, that could quite easily lead to additional funding being brought into the area.
Yeah,
and just, sorry, Barry, I've interrupted you. Carry on.
Yeah, I just want to come back. What I can't understand is by the mere fact that this site has been approved under the SAP, effectively gives you outline planning permission, to all intents and purposes. Not officially, I accept. So why? Because the principle has already been looked at by the inspector when they were looking at the SAP. The inspector effectively agreed with the council's proposition that this site can have housing built on it. So the inspector agreed with that. What I have difficulty with is why you've come back asking for the same thing again, because the inspector has already said, the debate's already taken place. Because I am concerned at how we're going to ensure that what the residents want is actually dealt with when it comes to the development itself. Because even doing it by conditions, again, as I know from bitter experience, what goes down in conditions isn't always built out and put in the final reserved matters. There's flexibilities built in, and it then comes down to the choice of the individual planner as to whether or not to push a particular condition or not. So it's the logic that I'm having the difficulty with, not necessarily the need for council housing in the area, which I think you've made, and you must have had to make it to the inspector. It's the logic that I'm having difficulty with.
Thank you, Barry. But just to clarify from my point of view, those things will come forward in a further application and we will have an opportunity to look at them in detail then. But I get that you're concerned about the process that happens between the two applications. Nicole, you've been waiting patiently to come in, and then I'll bring, oh, your hand's changed. Somebody's put their hand down. Nicole, you come in next, and then we'll bring Stuart in.
Thank you, Chair. It was just to clarify the situation with regard to the site allocations plan. So that has been established through the adoption of that plan, that site is a sound, sustainable site for the purposes of housing. That doesn't, though, and I think Councillor Anderson did acknowledge this, it isn't quite the same as granting outline planning permission. So it's a starting point in the plan that that members and officers have to give full weight to. But then, as we will see with the conditions on this application, there's a lot more to consider before an outline application can be granted, not least the need to impose conditions to ensure that all the other policies in the core strategy, for example, are reserved and complied with at reserved matters stage. So just a slight difference. The principle of the sustainability of the site for housing definitely already established, but not quite the same as granting outline planning permission.
Thank you. I will come back to you, Barry, but I'll take Stuart first.
Thank you, Chair. Nicole's probably summed it up far better than I could, but I was just going to sort of clarify that we've put a raft of conditions on to cover the matters like I say, housing standards, etc. They won't be conditions that will require they will require discharging, but not in a normal way. We can deal with them through the reserved matters application. So when the reserved matters application is submitted, the conditions that are on the outline to do with things that Councillor Anderson is talking about will be covered under that. And as you say, members, you will get to see them on any future application if that's how we so choose. And then Nicole covered the bit about the SAP allocation. So yeah, I think that hopefully clarifies it a little bit more.
Thank you. Did you want to come back, Barry? You've put your hand down.
No, it was a lazy hand.
Oh, was it? Okay, thank you. Any more questions, please, to Laura or her colleagues? Okay, can I thank you very much indeed, all colleagues who've come to speak on that. Thank you very much for your company this afternoon. Thank you. So members, it's now questions to officers if anyone would like to ask any, and I've got a few. Councillor Ray and then Councillor Campbell. Councillor Ray first.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. It was really to ask officers, in terms of when this did go through SAP, and obviously SAP is what it is, were there objections raised by the ward councillors to this site being included at SAP at the time, just to see how long the objection was? Because obviously there's an accusation that the council has erred in its understanding of the green spaces in this ward and the adjacent ward. And even if the council has erred, does the adoption of the SAP via the inspector mean it's neither here or there in that sense because it's been adopted?
Thank you. Who'd like to take that one? Stuart, do you want to take that?
I will, Chair. I'll start
Perhaps
with this one.
you'd like to take your hand down so I don't get confused as well, if that's
no
all right.
worries, of course. Yeah, apologies.
Thank you.
Yeah, done. Right, so to answer the thing about the miscalculation of the green space, now I'm not professing to be a policy officer. However, my understanding is that the amount of green space within Farnley and Wortley ward is absolutely correct. The amount has not changed from when it was done back in the early 2013 through to its adoption. What the issue has come about is the typology. So what a certain area of green space was classified as. So using Wortley Rec as the example, within that area of green space, there will be a multitude of different uses within it. So you'll be able to play sports on it, you'll be able to go walking on it, you'll be able to just relax, etc. So our policy officers had to put that into a certain category. Now, that's not to say that a different officer could have put it into another category. And I think that's the point that Ms. O'Keefe was sort of getting at saying. But I think the point is that the actual overall amount of green space within the ward is absolutely correct, and that was assessed by the officer, by the inspectors during the SAP process. In terms of the ward members, they did object to it through the SAP process, yes. That was considered. I think in total there was 13 objections raised to the SAP, to this allocation through the SAP process, raising a variety of different things. They were all considered and heard through the inspectorate, well, through the public inquiry. And I believe that this site was talked about, maybe not in length, but it was talked about by the inspector at that time. Hopefully that clarifies everything.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Ray?
Yes, it does, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The hands, I'm afraid I'll just have to take them in the order in which they're lined up because that's all I'm able to do. So Councillor Finnegan seems to have got in front of you, Councillor Campbell, but we will get there. Councillor Finnegan.
Thanks, Chair. Could the planning officer remind me of the percentage of brownfield land we're supposed to be aiming at within policy rather than developing greenfield sites, so the brownfield greenfield sites? And also, I know this ward is next door to mine. There seems to have been a hell of a lot of building on greenfield sites. Could you give me the breakdown for this particular ward to tell me what is the proportion, what is the percentage on greenfield as against brownfield? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
I don't have the answer to that. All I will say, I mean, my colleague Heather Davies from Policy, she may have the answer, we'll see. All I will say is, I don't necessarily think this is a case of greenfield versus brownfield. It's a site that's allocated for housing. So it's not a case of whether or not this is a brownfield first discussion. In my view, it's the fact that it's allocated for housing. I'm not sure if, Heather, you have anything more to add. If not, then that's as best as I can answer it, Chair.
Heather, do you want to come in at this point?
Thank you, Chair. I'm afraid I don't have those figures to hand on the proportion of brownfield greenfield development. Certainly, I think if that's a critical thing, it would be something we'd need to look into. So apologies for that.
Thank you.
Chair.
Yes, I was just going to invite you in, Steve.
Just briefly, we could probably provide those figures in the breakdown because it is a detailed question, but actually I'm not really sure they're relevant to this discussion when it's a SAP allocated site.
Yes, it was actually, I think Councillor Ray's question was about, you know, how final the deciding factor of being on an allocated site is. And this is an allocated site. So basically, it's agreed that housing will be here.
I think, Chair, just to try and answer that a little bit, the simple matter of fact is that if the City Council, which has a 5-year housing land supply based upon site allocations, that if we were to start refusing applications that come forward for development of SAP, we'd be completely undermining the process. So, you know, I know in some cases, particularly locally, members may not be happy with it, but it is a process that we went through and was very robust at the public inquiry. In fact, it was commented on, particularly by the inspector, as being a very robust process in Leeds' case.
Yeah. Robert, did you want to come back, or is that an old hand you've got?
Very briefly, the fact that a site's been allocated doesn't necessarily make it appropriate for housing. And just in response to some of the comments from the planning department, we've had so many sites in Morley that are greenfield sites that have been allocated under the SAP, which was based upon a target that was never achievable and shouldn't have been set in the first place. So we are looking at the specifics of whether this site is appropriate, taking into account policies that we have agreed in terms of brownfield to greenfield.
Yeah, I think we're getting into comments there, Councillor Finnegan. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Chair. You'll be pleased to know I'm not going to question the validity of the SAP. I do have my views on it, as you well know.
I do.
Can I just ask a couple of questions? Could somebody get up slide, which is number 19 on my pack?
Is it possible to get up 19? Do you want to start talking while they get it up, Colin?
Just give us a few minutes, Toby.
I've got a question related to that particular thing.
Here we are.
Right. Okay. The red line on the drawings wavers about a bit, but if I look on this particular slide, I see a tree line that runs east-west, I assume, on here, with a little kink. Is that the edge of the SAP site? The tree line?
Councillor, yes, that is correct. So the trees are within the green space to the north, but obviously their canopies overhang. But yeah, that wavy line, if you like, that goes through the trees. Yes, that's the edge of the site allocation.
Right. Okay. Fine. Thanks for that.
Is that? Oh, sorry. I thought that was very short for you, Colin.
I can go as long as you like, Chair. The other question, I suppose, from my point of view, I'm trying to understand the argument about it being a sports pitch. Could you tell me exactly what Sport England said in their comment?
Yep. So to be clear, Sport England have sent through 2 objections, if you like. So their first objection was to say that their first comment, sorry, was to say that they object on the application, but within their first paragraph, they do acknowledge that they are not a statutory consultee on the basis that it's not been used for a period of in excess of 10 years. They go into a great deal of detail about sport and recreation, which, to be fair to Ms O'Keefe, as explained in great length. After that, I believe, I don't know who, but I believe somebody got in contact with Sport England to ultimately say that they have been using the site as a sports pitch recently, and that it had been recently marked out. Sport England then sent a second comment, if you like, at the middle of February, I think it was, that said that if the pitch had been marked out, then they in their view become a statutory consultee. However, it's down to the local authority to make that distinction. Upon research, it appears as though that the pitch has, I believe, been marked out by the local community. That took place, I believe, late January, February. Within the Development Management Procedure Order, which I referred to in my presentation, it makes it clear that Sport England are not a statutory consultee if the pitch hadn't been demarcated out prior, subsequent to the planning application being submitted. So the application was submitted in December, and the pitch wasn't marked out. So that's where I'm coming from in terms of Sport England not being a statutory consultee. Notwithstanding comments made by Sport England, the planning authority is still of the view that, and appreciate I keep coming back to the fact, but it is a SAP allocation. It is allocated for housing. So it has, in our view, no basis for it to be a allocation of green space or sports pitch or anything like that, because all of that went through the SAP process. In addition, the site requirements, which went through the planning inspector, cover matters with regard to its former use, if you like. So it's dictated that on-site green space must be provided. It's dictated that there must be, in inverted commas, green link, which the planning authority's view, that will be a demarcated footpath that's green, that is a pleasure to walk up and down, rather than it being a 2 metre wide tarmac footpath. And there's also then the off-site improvements to green space within the area. So that's a long-winded way of answering that question, Councillor, but I hope that helps.
I'm afraid you can't inject into the debate at will. I'm sorry. All my instincts want to bring you in when you put your hand up, but I'm afraid I can't do that. It's a formal procedure. Councillor Anderson.
Right, a number of questions. One, which HMCA is this site in? Two, in respect of the dispute over green space, you say that the calculation has been correctly done, which I have no reason to dispute that the calculation has been done, but when we look at individual sites, the sustainability appraisal has a number of greens, reds and yellows on it. Now, was this site down either as a red or a yellow when it was looking about green space provision? The calculation may have been correct, but that doesn't mean to say that the ward or the surrounding area has the correct level of green space. So in other words, the maths is correct, but you're asking the wrong question, if you see what I mean. You're coming up with an answer to a question that's not actually being asked. So what's the logic behind that one? And I'm sorry, but Mr. Butler has totally, utterly confused me with his intervention over saying that this has been agreed through the SAP, so we can't go back to it. Well, if that was the case, my original point then stands. Why are we bringing forward not a detailed planning application? If Mr. Butler is correct, and it is irrelevant that this has been put through the SAP, then I cannot understand why he has said what he said, because we need to agree whether or not, in principle, this site can or cannot be done today. That, I thought, was the whole purpose. When the legal advisor advised me, she confirmed to me that that was the purpose of what we were being asked to do today, confirm whether or not, in our opinion, as a panel, this site can be used in principle for housing. Mr. Butler said that that's already been conceded. Well, if that's already been conceded, why are we here? And then the final point is, can somebody tell me what the commuted sums are? How much are they? And what are the commuted sums going to be set aside for, please?
I'll bring Mr. Butler back in at this point, as your question was directed specifically to him. Steve, if you want to come back.
Yeah, sure, Chair. I don't think I said anything that actually contradicted anything that that Nicole had said. That there are slight subtleties in the differences, and I'm not quite sure why we're focusing on this particular point, because we often bring forward outline applications, or developers bring forward outline applications. And in this particular case, I think Mr. Denton and Laura and the team are doing it absolutely correctly in terms of giving that opportunity for the local community to become involved in the time period that we have between the outline application being granted and effectively giving that piece of paper that says it is completely acceptable for residential development, and then the drafting up of the detailed the scheme at a later date. So it's almost like there's a conspiracy going on here, but I don't quite understand the point of the question, because if you turn this on its head, if Mr. Denton and his team had brought forward a full application, I'm sure we'd have been accused as a council of creating a fait accompli. So I don't think I've contradicted anything. I mean, if Nicole wants to add anything any further, she can do by all means, but I don't think there's any contradiction at all.
I'm going to move on at this point because we do need to make some sort of progress, and I've still got speakers waiting. So Councillor Heselwood, please.
What about the rest of the questions I asked?
Oh, sorry, you're waiting for further answers. Okay, Barry.
Chair, I'll come in. I'll try and briefly sum up. So the housing area is the Outer West. In terms of the green space question, I think it's important to know, well, two things to note on this. First of all, there is deficiencies across Leeds of different types of green space. It's not unique to Farnley and Wortley Ward. We acknowledge that, but we also have a duty to provide housing. This is affordable housing as well, so we have a duty to take everything into the mix. And I don't want to focus on this either too much longer, but when it comes to allocating sites for housing, green space, etc., the actual quality of that green space is only one cog in a very large wheel or whatever. It's not the defining factor when it comes to allocating sites. The type of green space is one factor, sustainability, highways, all them other factors come into play. So when this site was decided to be brought forward for housing and adopted as such by all the council, I must add, that it was just one factor. So I just wanted to make that point. In terms of the community sums, the reason why we're not, or nobody's able to tell you how much, is because at this stage, Councillor Anderson, we don't know, or the applicants don't know. That's because they are engaging with the local community about where they would like improvements to be made. They're engaging with Parks and Countryside, and they're also engaging with ward members about where best and what is best to be improved. So at this stage, there is no monetary value we can associate with that. There is a condition attached to the outline, and details of that will come forward in the subsequent reserved matters application. But nobody will be able to give an actual monetary value at this early stage of the application process. Thank you.
And would I be right in saying that would normally be the case in outline planning?
Absolutely, it would. Yeah, yes,
we never have detail at that stage.
No, because we don't have detail of the application at this early stage.
Councillor Heselwood.
Yeah, I'd just like to go back to Councillor Campbell's question, if I could. I think, regarding Sport England and whether they're a statutory consultee or not, I don't think we're being very fair, with how we're viewing Sport England. It's like you've gone back through and done a timeline to prove they're not statutory consultee. You say that the space hasn't been used in excess of 10 years. Well, it has been used for the last 10 years. It's just not been used as what you're calling it, official, with a marked pitch on it. But it has been used. We've heard that it's been used considerably in the last year. While people have been in lockdown for daily exercise, all sorts of things. So I think it's unfair to say that it's not been used in the last in excess of 10 years, because it has. It's just not had those official white lines marked on it. It's been used informally for quite a long time. And the fact that it was marked out in January, February, and then we go, oh, but they objected in December, so there can't be a statutory consultee. Oh, come on. I think we need to be a bit fairer about this.
Chair, I'll come back in. I'm not sure about if there was a specific question there or whether that was comments, but
it was a comment. It was a comment.
Can I still come in and answer? I just want to
clarify.
Can if you wish.
Yeah,
thank you. So it's not that we're not being fair to Sport England. We have, it's reported within the report. However, as a planning officer, my role is to take all consultees into consideration and allocate them due weight and consideration. That's what we've done. So I don't think it's that we've dismissed or parts their comments or anything like that. It's not a case either that I've gone back over a timeline and justified why they're not a statutory consultee. I, for my own benefit, have got to understand why I don't believe, as the planning officer for this application, why I don't consider Sport England to be a statutory consultee, and that's what I've done. I apologise if Councillor Heselwood doesn't agree with that, but that's my stance. In terms of the use, I think whilst I don't want to go into dates or anything like that, because I don't know the full timeline, my understanding is that for a considerable period of time, so from roughly about 2003, 2004 to roughly when the SAP was adopted, the site wasn't used. It may have been used as a cut through, but it wasn't used in any sport or recreation grounds. It was since the SAP was adopted, or maybe just slightly before, then the local community got involved. But notwithstanding that, I keep coming back to it, the site is now allocated for housing. So to some degree, the rest is a bit of a moot point because it is allocated for housing. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that. I can see that you want to come in, Nicole, so I'm going to keep you waiting just a little bit longer, Councillor Shemilt. Nicole.
Chair, yes, it was just to add to that, and I know that if people are using land or they've marked out a pitch, that to a layperson that would be thought to be a pitch, but actually for the purposes of Sport England and for the purposes of a status of a sports pitch, there are specific definitions, and as members know, if anyone is deemed to be a statutory consultee, then members should give greater weight to their views than non-statutory consultees, or they have to bear in mind that they are a statutory consultee. So to a layperson, it might not seem too important, but actually for the purposes of setting it out in the report and for the position that Stuart just has explained, that's the reason why it might seem as if officers are being pedantic about whether this is a sports pitch or when it was a sports pitch, but actually it's really important to the weight that's given to the decision making.
Okay, thank you for that, Nicole. Councillor Shemilt.
Yes, I'm just a bit confused about the way forward, because there aren't that many circumstances of which I've encountered, but that doesn't mean to say they haven't been there, where we've got a site that is owned by Leeds City Council and Leeds City Council is the applicant. So we're going forward requesting outline planning, but what's the next stage? Have we got people that are in, and also the complication is that this is council housing. So I appreciate you can't release names and you're not that far down the line, but what's the procedure for going out to tender, getting designs, seeking full planning permission, where we could actually make some comment on the detail of this rather than just an outline, which is a shot in the dark?
Stuart, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. To answer that first part, we can, but it would be for the applicant, regardless of being at Leeds City Council or not, to answer the next steps. It would be the same with any outline, with any reserved matters application. It would be for the applicant to come forward to the local planning authority with the details. I don't necessarily think that because the applicant is Leeds City Council, it actually hinders anything. It in some ways puts it under more scrutiny because obviously there's more eyes on us, I guess. But in terms of the next steps, unfortunately, I don't really have the answer to that because I'm just the planning officer dealing with what's in front of us.
There's no such thing as just a planning officer, Stuart.
I apologise.
You are a very good special planning officer.
Thank you, Chair.
I'll just make an observation at this stage. I've never known us debate quite so rigorously around the difference between an outline and the next stage and whether there's a need for outline. It seems quite unusual to me because we have been approving or not approving outline plans for the last 8 years while I've been a councillor. So I don't quite understand why the debate is taking quite so much of a swerve in this direction as it has. Councillor Brooks, I have seen your hand go up. Is it, have you changed your mind?
My question was answered some time ago. It was regarding the sort of legalities around the sports pitch.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are now on to comments and views, please. I've got Councillor Ray, please, and then I've got Councillor Shemilt and Councillor Brooks. Councillor Ray.
Thank you, Chair. I do think this is a really complicated one because you're balancing on the one side, if you will, the weight given to SAP against what the local community may see as their benefit. And as much as I have shooting me for the local community and the loss of green space, this has obviously been through the rigours of SAP. It was challenged by the local ward members at the time of SAP. So this isn't all of a sudden just a new set of objections. That process was rigorous, though painful, but it went through the process. And actually, we have to balance the need of the fact that we do have a dire need of council housing in this city, affordable council housing near to community amenities and access to accessible routes to employment, which this site does afford. And as much as the use may have been there, we live in a world of definitions. And if something hasn't met the specific definition set out in law or planning regulation, it isn't what it is, as much as we may disagree on a personal level that actually it should be. So as painful as it is, I think I have to agree with officers that actually the principle of development has been accepted via SAP. The principle of developing a type of development as the council is potentially proposing here is reasonable. And that on that basis, as much as it's a sad loss of green space for recreation to the local community, that battle was long lost. And we have to default to what is the accepted position as set by the SAP after inspection.
Thank you, Councillor Ray. Councillor Shemilt.
In a way, it overlaps with what Councillor Ray has just said. I have the greatest respect and sympathy for the local community who there is a tremendous amount of history to this site, and as a consequence it's become a very emotive subject, but at this stage the community are not in a position to make a proper informed judgment because they haven't got any more detail than we've seen in front of us. Councillor Ray is quite right. You know, there is a need for additional council housing, but that has to be balanced against the use of this green space as a playing field or sports field. But there isn't that evidence there, as far as I can see, that it's actually been used regularly over recent years or even decades, which is, had it been there, then I think it would have been a bit different. And certainly Sport England would have been more vociferous about it.
Thank you very much, Jackie. Councillor Brooks.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, my heart also goes out to the local community. I can see why it's so emotive, especially, you know, the lack of green space as has been alluded to. But unfortunately, as Councillor Ray said and Councillor Shemilt, we don't really have any sort of planning reason to turn this down, as far as I can see it. So I will be voting in favour with a heavy heart, and yeah, much respect to the local community for their campaign on this.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brooks. Councillor Finnegan.
Thank you, Chair. I won't be supporting this. I think that's no surprise to people. The site allocations process was somewhat of a shambles based upon unachievable and unrealistically high targets that has to influence people's judgments. At this particular point, I accept that we need council houses. Indeed, we haven't had any council houses built in Morley since 1981. Birch Court, for people's information at this particular point. The community are right, they need the green space at this particular point. We shouldn't say that we are prepared to accept council housing at any price. I think it's about time that we made a stand, protect greenfield sites and support the community. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, I can't support it either, although I will start by saying I do recognise the need for council housing in this area, and I do think, but what I had a degree of sympathy with what Claire O'Keefe said, that she came up with some alternative locations that might be feasible. Now, I'm not saying that all of those will necessarily be acceptable to all local residents, and they may, some of those people who have objected may object to that as well. But I do think that there may be other alternative locations. I'm also concerned that I was not satisfied as to whether or not the deficiency of green space was highlighted at the time when it was going through SAP, as to whether or not the sustainability analysis did contain any any reds or yellows at the time. Because it was a lot of these sites were balanced judgments, which is fine. That was the process. I might not like it, but that was the process that was done. And also, I personally do think more weight should be put on to the Sport England's concerns in terms of green space. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Campbell, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think we drift in slightly here, if you forgive me for saying so. I think I'm looking at this. I understand what everybody's saying, and I've said I'm no fan of the SAP process, but we have had a SAP, and it has been accepted, and I think it's a whatever we would like. This is a housing site, so if it went to an appeal and we turn this down in principle, which is what I think a lot of people are saying, is I have an awful suspicion we would lose that appeal. Because as I say, this is a designated housing site. I know there's some comment about council housing, but actually we don't give planning permission for council housing as opposed to other. We give permission for housing. So that's the principle of that. I suppose I should have asked the question before, but I'm not actually sure this is an outline application, the more I read it, because we've been asked to defer and delegate subject to a referral to the Secretary of State, and I suppose I should have asked a question before about why is that. But then, though it says in paragraph 3 on page 64, the application relates to an outline plan application, and as such, it should be made clear that the proposal relates to the principle, etc., and then reserve matters would be a later addition. And yet we've got 30 conditions in front of us on page 63 and 64. So I suppose the question I'm asking is it actually an outline application? Because if it was an outline application with a red line around it and the points of access, then it might be less of an issue than I suppose an application which theoretically is outline and in principle, but actually contains 30 conditions. So I have some concerns about whether this is actually an outline application that we've been asked to agree.
Thank you. A very late question, Colin, but I will bring officers in who I'm sure will clarify that position as we go on. But first of all, are there any more comments or views that people would like to express at this point? Having listened really carefully to the debate, I'm convinced that it's an outline plan that was identified at the SAP, and therefore it is a housing site. And I agree with the comments that Colin has just made about the likely outcome of any sort of appeal. It is a housing site. It is an outline plan which we have had in the framework for many years now. And for me, it is the balance between whether the compensatory green space against the need for council housing, and which I should give the most weight to. And you know, having listened to Ms. O'Keefe, I can see how passionate those residents are, and I can feel how much their elected members would want to represent their interests. And I absolutely, completely embrace the kind of activity that they've been doing with that green space. But for me, it is a housing site, and we do need council housing. And I personally would come down on the side of proceeding with this application. So that would be my view. Do I have anybody who could make the recommendation, propose the recommendation?
I'm happy to recommend. I'm happy to do so, Chair. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hamilton. Do I have a seconder?
Yes, I'll second it, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Reagan. I'm now going to go down the list of people again and ask for your vote either in favour of the recommendation or against the recommendation. Councillor Anderson.
Against.
Councillor Brooks.
In favour, Chair.
Councillor Campbell.
Abstain, Chair.
I didn't quite catch that, Colin.
I'm not convinced by the arguments we've received so far, but I understand the principle that we outlined about the site. But at the moment, I can't vote in favour, so I'm abstaining.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Finnegan.
Against, Chair.
Councillor Hamilton.
Support the recommendation, Chair.
Councillor Heselwood.
Abstain, Chair.
Councillor Reagan.
In favour, Chair.
Councillor Shamilt.
Against.
Councillor Ray.
Favour, Chair.
And I'm in favour too. So Andy, if you could summarise that for us, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. There were 5 members voted in favour, 3 abstentions and 2 against.
So that's does that give me a casting vote?
No, there's 5 in favour.
Oh, 5 in
against, 2
favour.
against,
It's
Chair.
approved. Yeah, thank you very much.
Can I just say, was it not 3 against and 2 abstentions?
Chair, Councillor
Okay.
Anderson's correct. Yeah,
It was.
you've got
Yes.
okay. Back to front.
Would you prefer to do the vote again for the record to make sure that we are accurate in the summary? It didn't take us too long, so I will do that again for clarity. Councillor Anderson, please.
Against.
Councillor Brooks.
In favour, Chair.
Councillor Campbell.
Abstain.
Councillor Finnegan.
Against.
Councillor Hamilton.
In favour, Chair.
Councillor Heselwood.
Abstain, Chair.
Councillor Reagan.
In favour, Chair.
Councillor Shemilt.
Against, Chair.
Councillor Ray.
Favour, Chair.
And I'm in favour. So Andy, that is 5
Yeah,
in favour.
Yep, that's correct. Councillor Anderson was correct before, Chair. So, sorry, I can't read my own writing there. So
Okay.
yeah, 5 in favour, 3 against and 2 abstentions.
Thank you very much. And Steve, can you sum up the debate for us just briefly, please?
Sorry, Chair, I was just checking the numbers at the same time. The application has been approved for outline development as recommended by officers. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, folks. Now, we still do have quite a long afternoon ahead of us. So I'm going to schedule in a 10-minute break at this point for people so that we do make it to the end in one piece, so you can get yourself a drink and make yourself comfortable from this point. Could I ask you to mute, please, before we go into recess? And I will see you at 3:20.
Chair, we're still waiting for one or two members to return to the seats. I'm conscious that we've had just a little more than the 10 minutes that you said, so I don't know whether you want to recommence or wait for them to come back. You're muted, Chair.
It's only been 11 months. You think I would have learned, wouldn't you? I think we'll recommence, I think, Andy, please.
Okay, everybody's in now anyway.
Okay. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Thank you for making it back after the break. That takes us on to item 10, which is change of use and alterations to a former council building. And Carol, I think this is yours, isn't it?
Thank you, Chair. It is, yes. Could I have the slide, which I think, there we go. So yes, this application is a scheme to the conversion of a Grade 2 listed building, which is also in the Rawdon Littlemore Conservation Area. The scheme was the building was originally offices, which belonged to the council, and this scheme is to convert it to 8 apartments. All the apartments will be 2-bed, except for one, which will be 3-bed. Can I have the next slide, please? This is an aerial photograph. This shows you the listed building in its setting at the moment. It's surrounded by parkland. It has car parking to the front, well, to the front elevation on this image as it is at the moment, but that isn't the front elevation of the property itself. To the rear is the library, as you can see. The proposed access will be off New Roadside. Can I have the next slide, please? And this is showing you the rear of the building. The car parking to the rear of this building doesn't belong to the application site. There's a ramp there you can see on that elevation that will be removed, and so will the white sort of conservatory style building that's on that elevation as well. I want to point out to you at the moment on this elevation, the flat roofed part of the building, which is on the right hand side, very similar, very close to the tower that's there, and because this is where the main alteration will be happening on the external of the building, where there's going to be a new extension on top of that flat roofed extension. Can I have the next slide, please? This is showing you the elevation that faces onto the car park. What's going to change on this elevation, and I have got the elevation plans to show you in a minute, but the ramp will be removed. And then if you look at the single story projection to the side, that will have a new door and a window that will be more in keeping with the existing building. The 2 trees that are on that plan, on that photograph, will also remain. Can I have the next slide, please? That's just showing you that side extension with the window that will change, and that's tree that will remain. Can I have the next one, please? This photograph shows you the side elevation. Close to that tree will be where the bin store will go. And then the grassed area you can see on the right-hand side will be amenity space for a couple of the flats. Can I have the next slide, please? This is showing you the other side of the building now. You can see the ramp there that I talked about a minute ago that will be removed. And you can also see the UPVC porch area that will also be taken out. Can I have the next one, please? These photographs are just taking you slowly around the building. So again, you can see this ramp and you can see the porch that will come. If you look to the right-hand side, there used to be a stained glass window on that elevation that is currently boarded up. That will be restored as part of the scheme. Can I have the next one? Again, this is just showing you very similar to what you've seen before. I'll move on to the next one. This is showing you the existing tower, which will remain, and it's showing you the side elevation of the flat roofed extension, which has been on the building, where the new extension will go on top of. Can I have the next one? Again, that's just showing you the side of the tower and where the extension will go above those very large, big windows. The next one, please. Again, that's showing you another view of the flat roof. The 3 openings on the bottom of this picture will be closed up and they will have stone to match. Can I have the next one, please? This is the main frontage of the building. This looks out onto the park. You can see the flat roofed projection there, which will have the new extension. What will also happen on this elevation is that they will dig down to the front to reveal a basement, which will form a basement flat, which will have a courtyard access to that flat only in front of it. Can I have the next one? This shows you the area that's going to be dug out. If you look to the left-hand side, you can see sort of the edge of the paved area or the hard standing area. That will form a retaining wall, and the area to the right-hand side will all be dug out to form this flat. That wall will have railings above. Can I have the next one, please? This again is showing you the area to the front that will be dug out and will form the basement flat. Again, the right-hand side, the retaining wall, the top of what will be the retaining wall. Can I have the next one, please? That's just showing you its relationship with the park area. The red line goes to where the first wall is on the left-hand side. Can I have the next one, which I think will show you the red line? There you go. That's the existing red line of the building at the moment. So you can see it has a very small curtilage to it, which provides for a small amount of amenity space and the car parking for the scheme. It has to be remembered, though, that the building, its setting is within a very large park. Can I have the next one, please? This is showing you the proposed plan. What this shows you is the grey area to the bottom is the proposed car parking, and there's a grey area to the north which will provide another 2 car parking spaces for the scheme. So there'll be 16 spaces in total for the 8 flats. The green areas are showing the amenity space. Not every flat will have amenity space. 4 out of the 8 flats will have some form of amenity space. And then the area to the left-hand side is showing you the dig out to form that basement flat. Can I have the next slide, please? I'm just going to quickly run through the elevation plans with the before and after for you to just get a grip of what's going out on the outside. So this is the elevation that overlooks the park, which we're going to have the basement on and the extension. And the next slide will show us both of those developments. Can I have the next one, please? So you can see the basement that's been dug out and the windows that will be put into that basement. You have to bear in mind that when you've got the wall there and the railings above, you won't see those windows in the basement area. On top of the extension, you can see that there will be, at top of the existing extension, there'll be this new extension that's going on. Now on this elevation, it's difficult to see it on this, and you can see it on some images in a minute, but this elevation will be curved and it will have a mirrored finished. And in front of the curved mirrored area will be a sitting out area for the people of those flats. Can I have the next one, please? This is showing you the other side that we saw facing towards the car park. And if I show you the next slide, please, the changes to this elevation are just a new window and a new door in that single story element on the right-hand side, as well as the removal of the ramp. Can I have the next elevation, please? This is the elevation where I showed you where the ramp was coming out and where the UPVC small porch was coming out, and you can see on the right hand side again the flat roof that's going to have the extension above, and the next slide will show you the extension above. Can I have the next one, please? This is showing you the extension above. This part will be made, will have an elevation of metal. At the moment we haven't decided what kind of metal that material will be and what colour it will be. We need to get samples up against the stonework when potentially it may be cleaned and they'll be repointing. At that point we would like to see what the material will look like against the building. So officers have conditioned that so that we can determine that at a later stage. Can I have the next slide, please? I think it's the final elevation. This is showing, yes, the final elevation, which is looking sort of where the tree would trying to explain where this one is. This elevation is showing you the back of it and the side of the proposed new extension, and the final slide, I think, the next elevation, please, is showing you where that extension will go on the right-hand side. I think I've got one more slide, which is the images. So if you can give me the next slide, please. So these are showing you the extension. Now, the actual glaring colour is not what we expect the extension to look like. This is just giving you a representation of where the extension goes and the shape of it. As I've said to you before, the materials will be decided at a later date. But it also gives you an idea of where the basement flat is going on that third 3D image, and that you won't be able to see that basement flat when you're in the park or from outside of the site. So in terms of the main issues, the principle is acceptable and will address the ongoing maintenance issues and contribute to the viability and the vitality of the area. In terms of the impact on the listed building, which you've seen, alterations to the existing facades are kept to a minimal. The changes to the building, which I've already explained, being the creation of the basement flat with its own entrance and full height windows and a small courtyard. These works, as I've said, are generally screened by the existing terrace wall and which will have railings above. The other major change, as you've already seen, is this extension. In terms of the extension, this is above an existing extension which dates from the early 1900s, and it's thought that it would have had a conservatory style structure above it, which has since been removed. This extension will form bedroom 3 of the 3-bed unit. The materials I've said for this extension will be metallic cladding on 2 sides and mirrored on the other. But the existing building needs to be repointed and cleaned to assess which material will be the most appropriate for the development. It is considered that this extension is not overly large when compared to the host building and will remain a subservient addition. The full height windows reflect the vertical emphasis of the existing building, especially in the adjacent tower and its windows. The extension gives a complementary but contextual response to the spatial characteristics of the listed building. There are also internal changes that are required to the building, and the precise details of these are still in discussion with the applicant and officers. Whilst they do have a degree of impact on the significance of the listed building, it delivers a sustainable future for this listed building, which will involve considerable investment and a repair programme. Looking at its location in the surrounding area, residential conversion seems the only viable conversion alteration, and this will require changes, but this will secure the long-term future of the listed building. In terms of the residential amenity elements, all the apartments comply with policy H9 in terms of their overall size. There are 3 bedrooms that aren't the size of a double bedroom, but they exceed the single bedrooms criteria. Whilst there isn't sufficient amenity space, as I explained with the dwellings, this is due to land ownership and the historic setting of the listed building, but it is located, as you've seen, next to an existing park, and it is considered that any harm caused by the lack of such space is outweighed by the benefits of bringing this building back into use. In terms of parking, sorry, I can't see where my arrow is. In terms of parking, there are 16 car parking spaces and they'll all be serviced by electric charging points, plus a cycle store for 1 cycle per flat. This, along with the site being in a sustainable location and the change of use from offices to residential, it is considered that it will not have any intensification on the highway network. Since the papers have been issued, we've received one further objection from the Victorian Society. They are saying that the current proposals will harm the building in terms of the proposed extension, which is at odds with the characteristics of the existing building, and due to its location will be visually prominent. The materials will be very eye-catching and at odds with the materials of the existing building. The degree of internal alterations seem high, and the treatment of some of the historic decorative elements is poor in places and lacks detail. The building plan forms will cause harm by obscuring original volumes in the rooms and historic circulation patterns, and the loss of a historic staircase and subsequent erosion of the historic plan form will be very harmful to the building. As this has been an ongoing process with the applicant, we have come up with a number of additional conditions that we require to be added to this application. These will include details of the attic layout, proposed details of the attic roof structure, details of bathroom and ensuite pods, revised details for mezzanine floors, details of tanking to the basement, details of cleaning of the vaulted basement ceiling, details of retention or replacement of the stone basement stair, revised roof plan to show the chimneys being retained, sample of stones for the infilling areas, revised plans for basement window in the west elevation, and details of fire protection. Because we're looking at quite a number of conditions and we're still in negotiation with the applicant on these, officers are suggesting that the recommendation is changed to defer and delegate approval, subject to us negotiating further on the above conditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol, for that. And can I just start off then, please, by asking the panel whether you are happy to agree, defer and delegate rather than grant permission today on the basis of that large number of conditions that need negotiating around. I think the way to do it is I'll take silence as a yes. And if there are people who want to object to that, please raise your hand. Councillor Brooks.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, I don't know how to start with this because I'm kind of shocked at the changes to the building.
Sorry, I'm just asking the first question first, Councillor Brooks. It's just, are you happy? I'm not asking for you to agree a recommendation, but are you happy that we consider, instead of considering grant permission, that we consider defer and delegate because of the large number of conditions that have come forward at this late point and need further negotiation? If we were to agree it, we wouldn't know what we were agreeing because so many of the conditions have not been negotiated. So defer and delegate is what I'm asking you. Just as a one-off first question, are the panel happy to agree defer and delegate as the recommendation instead of grant permission today?
No, I personally would prefer if it came back to panel.
Okay, Councillor Shemilt?
Yes, I would prefer it came back to panel.
Are there any? Yes, Steve?
Should we not have the debate first and then come back to
okay,
to
if you prefer that.
Yeah, okay. I think because members have not obviously had the opportunity to talk to officers or listen to the objector either. So, but we just want members to be mindful of the fact that because of the conditions, that's what officers are now suggesting is the appropriate recommendation. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. We do have a speaker on this. Mr. Taylor is here to speak to object. Can the speaker come forward, please? Is Mr. Taylor with us?
I'm with you at the moment. You're not seeing my video, but in some ways that may be an advantage to you all.
You are with us. That's fine.
I'm happy to speak, and whether you can see me or not, I shall leave to your discretion.
That's fine.
Yeah, right.
So you have up to 4 minutes, Mr. Taylor, and then we'll cut you off, but we'll allow you to finish the sentence you're on. Thank you.
Understand. I'm Richard Taylor, one of the original members of the steering group who took over the library in Micklefield Park 5 years ago, and we revitalised the community. The library is a tenant of the council, and therefore we didn't feel it was appropriate to lodge its own objection, as we felt we might jeopardise our relationship with the council. The adjacent stables have now been redeveloped. Developer did not seek to extend the stables anyway and extract maximum value. We fully support repurposing of Micklefield House as a continuation of revitalising this public space. I'm speaking today on behalf of 32 objectors. There's not one letter of support. Don't you think this is an important indicator? Primary objections relate to the proposal to add a second floor on top of the ground floor 1960s extension. In addition to local residents, this has been objected to by Leeds Civic Trust, Airborough Neighbourhood Forum, Rawdon Parish Council and the Victorian Society. These are not individual NIMBYs, but substantial organisations who understand planning law and have the interest in preserving this Grade 2 listed building and enhancing the local environment and park. I'd first like to draw your attention to paragraph 48 in the Planning Officer's report, in which I believe there's a misunderstanding. It's stated that there previously probably existed a conservatory on top of the current extension, and therefore implied what is being proposed is a replacement for this. Photographs, which you've all had, show this is not the case. The current 60s extension replaced the Victorian conservatory and was no higher than ground floor. Officer states in the report that the second floor proposal was a bit like placing a porter cabin on the roof. The minor design changes from shiny metal to perhaps copper cladding don't alter it from still being a porter cabin. Hence, nobody's commented on these changes. There's no reference to any attempt to persuade the applicant to remove the second floor. If the reason is not planning but financial, is this appropriate? And if so, what are the economics? Many of the park visitors are local with limited means, whose children currently enjoy the playground without being overlooked. It is not safe to provide a close vantage point over a children's playground when none currently exist and detracts from neighbourhood amenity. By contrast, purchase of this flat cannot be of limited means. Are members comfortable with creating an environment where occupants look down on others and they have to look up to them? There will be no restriction on occupants of the second floor having gatherings with associated noise, music, shouting, possibly inappropriate language. Although characterised as the third bedroom, it could just as easily be used as living space. This extension is a contravention of the Parish Council Emerging Neighbourhood Plan as expressed in their objections. Why has this been ignored? There is a potential conflict of interest between the financial gains of repurposing the building and the requirement to apply planning law. The second floor extension doesn't comply with P11 of the core strategy, N19 of the UDP, or paragraph 130 of the NPPF. The economic argument for the third bedroom should not overrule planning considerations. As an alternative to rejecting the officer's recommendation, it suggested that consideration of this application be deferred to enable officers and the full panel to persuade the applicant to withdraw the first floor extension and provide a two-bedroom apartment like all the others in the building. Micklefield House is an important Grade 2 listed building, and any changes must enhance it or at least not cause harm. The annex proposals do harm and the listed building, but also harm the conservation area. It's therefore contrary to the NPPF and should be refused as it stands. And that was less than 4 minutes.
It was indeed. Thank you very much, Mr. Taylor. Are there any questions to Mr. Taylor, please, panel? Councillor Campbell, please.
You mentioned, Mr. Taylor, that it's contrary to the Emerging Neighbourhood Plan. Can you tell me why it's contrary and how?
Well, I think actually there's a member of the Rawdon Parish Council on this particular call, and I would suggest that she's already declared an interest that she would talk better than I would about the Emerging Neighbourhood Plan.
I'm not sure that was the question. Councillor Campbell, was it?
Well, not really.
No.
You're saying you don't know the answer, but Councillor Shamel might know the answer. Then
I actually, yeah, I think it might be inappropriate since Councillor Shamel did declare an interest, although not a pecuniary one. Steve, did you want to come in?
That was precisely the point I was going to make, Chair, that I think if Councillor Shamel was sat making points and on behalf of the parish council,
that would not be
she would
acceptable.
have to then abdicate herself from the voting.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well,
so we can't accommodate that.
I will attempt to answer the question as best I can, and that is the fact that in the Emerging Neighbourhood Plan, they actually asked that buildings remain the same, and this is not remaining the same.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Councillor Anderson.
Yes, Mr. Taylor, you came up towards the end of your presentation, you came up with one alternative. If officers were to spend more time talking to local ward members, Rawdon Parish Council and other interested bodies, do you think a solution can be found, but working within the parameters that we've got before us as proposed by officers? Do you think that's feasible, or do you think that you're all so far apart that the chances of coming up with a compromise position would be likely to be unachievable?
I think it's a simple matter of economics, in that all the apartments in this particular building, with one exception, are two-bedroom apartments. And the person who wishes to develop this wants to make a third bedroom. And that third bedroom obviously gives better income. And that income, I presume, reflects itself in the amount it pays to the council. So the council is actually possibly going to have to say to itself, I may take a little bit less money for the site that I am negotiating, but actually will end up with 2 bedrooms and not infringing the planning law. And that is the conflict. That is the conflict that I believe you have.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any more hands with questions. Anybody else want to come in? In that case, thank you very much indeed, Mr. Taylor, for coming this afternoon and speaking to us. Thank you. We've now got questions to officers, please, panel. Councillor Brooks.
It was to respond to the previous point raised. No, I was just going to say that I want to reassure the previous speaker that we do not consider the money made by the council on any sale of land to be a material consideration as panel members.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that would be appropriate, Kaylee, to bear in mind as we're having the debate and making comments.
Absolutely, Chair.
Yeah. Are there any further questions? Councillor Anderson, is that a question? Yes.
Yeah. Okay. One is what I've looked through the report and I can't see any specific comments from the ward members. Were there any? Secondly, in paragraph 14, the very last bullet point is made that there is some comment about the access officer. So in terms of equalities access, can we just have clarity on, okay, the point's been made, doesn't mean to say that it's correct. I'm just asking for clarification as to whether or not there is or is not an access issue. And the other question is, what weight, this is probably one for Nicole, what weight should we put on the emerging Rawdon neighbourhood plan, even though we might not necessarily have a detailed knowledge as to which part we've concerns about, but in terms of the principle, what weight should be put on the emerging one?
Thank you. I think Nicole is wanting to come in on your last point, Barry. Yeah. Nicole?
Thanks, Chair. Yes, so as with all emergent policies, obviously the further along the process a plan gets, then the more weight you can give. But actually in relation to neighbourhood plan policies, then they only should be given full weight at the point that a referendum has been carried out. And so I'm sorry, I'm struggling to find the place in the report with the neighbourhood plan. Perhaps one of my colleagues could confirm that for me. I'm just furiously scrolling through the report to find out what stage it's at. But certainly if it's before the referendum stage, then really very little weight, because there hasn't been much consultation and certainly not a vote on whether members of that area have voted in favour of it.
Thank you. Thank you. Kaylee, did you want to come back?
What about my other questions?
Oh, I'm so sorry, Barry. A lapse in concentration. My apologies. Please continue, officers.
Thank you for your other questions there. In terms of the access officer, I believe that the access officer would prefer to have one of the ramps to remain. I think we've taken the ramps out to provide amenity space to some of the flats. And that was the reason for it. I mean, and obviously the ramps are detrimental to the listed building because they're not very attractive. But there's nothing to say that we could, if you think access to the flats with a ramp is important, that's something that we could negotiate. And I think I can't remember the other question. What's the other question, Councillor Anderson?
What was ward members?
Yeah. Well, Councillor Wadsworth has obviously commented because he's the one that's asked for the members for it to come to Plans Panel for a decision. The other two members have not passed any comments at the moment on that application. And for information for members why I'm on, we have got Phil Ward, our listed building officer, here, if there's any questions that you have of him about the actual listed building specifically.
Thank you, Carol. Any further questions? Councillor Brooks, your hand is up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Would officers mind bringing up slide 45, please?
It's coming. There we go.
So I've got some questions with regards to this additional layer on top of the 1960s building. So I don't understand how that can be considered not to be harming the heritage asset that this building is. Could you talk me through that, please?
I think that might be one for Phil, unless anyone would like to come in first. It's gone quiet. Is Phil here?
I thought he was,
Yeah.
Chair. I'm waiting for him to respond because.
Is he on, Andy?
Hello, sorry, I was muted.
Okay.
I do apologise. Just before I comment on the extension, the policies in the core strategy on design and conservation do invite innovative responses in historic contexts. Of course, there's still a judgment to be made as to whether the innovative response is appropriate to listed building. A few things I would say about the roof extension. It is set below the eaves line of the host building. It is within the footprint of the 60s extension. So I don't think it could be said to dominate the listed building. I think looking at the elevation, maybe not the elevation, but the renderings, the 3D renderings we saw before, the striking thing about it is the concave face to the park. I'm not sure about the polished zinc, and that's something that I think we want to take back and discuss with the applicant. But what I would say is that concave face responds to the dynamic form of the listed building. It's very shapely, it's in and out, and it has elements such as curved balconies. So you could say it does mirror the historic form of the building. As I said before, I do think we need to go back and revisit materials. Zinc, I think, is too visually heavy, but copper, I think, could be a much lighter and a better response to the listed building.
Can I come back on that, Chair, please?
You can, yes.
Would it be possible to bring up slide 44?
I'm sorry about this pause, everybody. It's just the technology. It is taking a time. Here we go.
I should maybe have said before you got rid of it. My apologies. So if we look at the original building, and it's my understanding that the 1960s extension part was originally a conservatory. If you look at it, like, my view is that you've got this tower. You've got this tower, and the point of this tower is to like, emphasize a grandness. You've got I suppose, like, a little bit of what's the word, symmetry in a way, in the way that the windows and everything are aligned. I've got real concerns about how putting an extra floor on that extension will throw the whole building off balance. I understand the arguments for adapting buildings to make them more like to preserve the building, but the building itself is large enough, really, to be able to cope with enough flats to cover the cost of the developer. I'm really not convinced that we should be discussing materials. We should be discussing the principle of that addition, especially. I don't mind so much about the basement, because as it states in the report, it won't be noticeable, really. But that is going to really change the character of that building, and I'm really quite. I mean, I am really quite annoyed about it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Brooks. And I think you've made a very strong statement about design there, which is perfectly reasonable. Let us not confuse it with personal taste. That would be my only advice as your chair. I've got Councillor Heselwood next, and then Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, I just want to agree with Councillor Brooks. I don't think, looking at those pictures that we were shown with the materials, I don't think they're in keeping with the original building at all. I don't think they complement the building. So for me, if you're going to build an extension onto the, another floor onto the original extension, then it needs looking at with a lot more sympathy in relation to the original building. Because for me, and a comment was made that it would dominate the building. From that angle of the building, I think in those materials it would dominate the building, and it would completely throw out it's a fabulous building. It's a brilliant listed building, and I don't think it will complement it at all. So if there is going to be another floor on that, then I would like to see other materials considered, because I don't think it's going to complement the original building, and it's a listed building.
Thank you, Jules. Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, it's on a similar point. I got sent by Clive Wood some photographs last night. I don't know whether he sent them to every single member of the panel, but the way that it was described by him in the pictures he sent gave me cause for concern, right? But can I ask Carol Cunningham the same question I asked Mr. Taylor? Do you think a revised proposal is feasible on materials and look, while still retaining this extra building or this extra part of the building? Do you think you are close to being able to get anything different, or would you say that you're so far, not you personally, the applicants and the council are so far apart in terms of trying to come to an amended proposal? Is it worthwhile deferring to get that, or what's your view?
I mean, yes, you could defer it for us to go back and negotiate on materials. I think Phil will give you more advice on what he would think was appropriate, but I think what we're trying to achieve here is something that's contemporary and modern on there, rather than replicating something from the past. So I don't know what materials to suggest other than what officers have negotiated at the moment, and unless Phil can come up with another idea on the scheme. Phil, have you got any comment?
Hello. As I said previously, I think copper, which would oxidize and go green, could be a visually lighter response than zinc, and it's material you often see on buildings of this age, used on the roof, for instance, and flashing. So I think it would have if you like, an historical sympathy with the building.
Okay, thanks, Phil. Thank you. Councillor Campbell.
Well, I think there's a choice, isn't there? There's a principle about whether you say there should be an extension or there shouldn't be an extension. If in an ideal world, I think I'd like to get rid of the 1960s extension, which is not in itself a great addition, but we've stuck with it. I also think that if you look at the original building and it had come to plans panel, we'd be talking for hours about the detailing on that, because it's a real mishmash of styles, which happens to work My view is if we are going to have an extension, the last thing we want is an extension that attempts to replicate the original building, because I think it just end up being what the phrase, a pastiche. And I tend to agree with Phil, actually. You know, if we're doing this, we need to make it obvious that it's a new addition. And actually, I'm not as precious as everybody else seems to be about the principle of a light, I was going to say glass fronted, shiny fronted extension on the side, because that makes it really clear that this is an extension. This is a piece of new build. Okay, it might be a bit in your face, but new design may well need to be that. So from my point of view, the detailing of the extension materials might need some discussion, but the general principle is fine with me.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. Councillor Shemilt.
Oh, I'm not muted for a change. Right. Aside from, I mean, this has nothing to do with personal preference at all. But what the comments that have been made and the feedback that I've gleaned is that I don't think anybody has an issue with the conversion of this building, because it's difficult. You know, nobody's going to want that size of residential house, and if they did, not where it is. So it's ideal to be converted into more bite-sized units, if you like. But if we, in other plans panel discussions, we've talked at length about the design and whether it's appropriate or not. And I totally acknowledge Councillor Campbell's points and the fact that something has to be contemporary, but it is just too jarring, in my personal opinion, at the moment, and it needs a bit more tweaking to make it a bit softer and a bit more. It doesn't need to replicate the rest of the building at all. It can't. But the 60s extension, it was before anybody went on about it, and so that's been a bit of an eyesore. So to stick another story on it is a bit like patching it up, and I think they could do with going back and rethinking that a bit. But we are mindful, I think, of how much time this has taken and how I've not spoken to the developers about it, obviously, but how much time and effort they've put in. And we want to try and work with them if possible, because it's an ideal solution. It's just not perfect. And in my view, it's just not perfect at the moment. I think it could be improved. Thank you.
Thank you. We have gone into comments, so I will take at this point both comments and if anybody had any questions as well. Paul, Councillor Ray.
Thank you for that, because mine was a comment. I didn't realise we hadn't got the comments yet.
We assume we're at comments, please.
It is a really difficult one, because I think we've had conversations on this panel before about alterations to historic buildings, and when people try and replicate a historic building and it goes horribly, horribly wrong, because trying to get the style of the old building is difficult. And I think I'll come to the previous comments. I think in that sense, I think it's the principle of this is it there or is it not there? If we agree the principle, if it is there, then actually you probably have to then make a judgment over whether or not they can realistically design something that actually complements the history of the building, or you accept that there's modernity and design moves on. Or you do make the other argument and say, well, actually, they don't need the additional room. As a commercial consideration from their point of view, we don't think it matches the building. I must admit, from my point of view, I'm slightly 50-50. I don't know which is the right side to fall down on, because it is such a weird one. Obviously, it would help the building in terms of revenue, etc., for it to have as many rooms as it can. But at the same time, that has to be complementary to its surroundings. But at the same time, I also don't think we should err into designing this via committee.
No.
And that's, I think, is the really difficult point. And I'm hear what other colleagues say, because I think this is a really, really difficult balance, and we shouldn't rule out the modern just because it's modern on an old building.
Thank you, Councillor Ray. Councillor Brooks?
Yeah, following on from Councillor Ray's comments, I think that's what I was saying with regards to the principle of having the addition in the first place, because as I explained, I think it would just throw the building out, whether it's a softer addition or whether it's a harder one. It's going to look odd. It's just going to look strange. So and that is an important design consideration. It's not actually got anything to do with personal taste from my point of view. Like, I'm a person that actively seeks out brutalist buildings in my spare time to look at and enjoy them. So it's not that. It's more the appreciation of the history of the building and the aesthetics of the building at the moment, and whether that addition will cause harm. And in my book, it will cause harm. It will throw off the balance of that building. So yeah, that's my comment.
Thank you.
Chair?
Yes, Steve.
I tried to raise my hand, but I think it came as a thumbs up.
Oh, did it? Sorry, I didn't notice that.
I'm in my technology, don't I? 'Cause I haven't actually used them for a little while. Could I possibly come in at some point just to make a comment in terms of the recommendation, if members want to continue? But
You can, but we'll just see if there are any
Yeah.
more views first, Steve, and then I'll come back. Yeah. Is there anybody else who'd like to express a view? Because I think I probably would just like to kind of summarise where I think we've got to with this. We've considered the value of having this old building put back to work and therefore preserved, which is a valuable feature. And we're considering that against the balance of having a contemporary stroke traditional combination, and whether that combination in this particular example works, though I have heard a number of people express support for contemporary and traditional combinations, and I do myself. It's whether those things come together in this particular development and whether we've got the right balance here. Personally, and I did mention this at the chair's brief with Carol, I'm not entirely convinced that those slides that we've seen actually do give us a proper impression of what that building will look like. I think we're all struggling because we're struggling to interpret what those images are telling us. They're not easy to distinguish, and I think we need a better, it's just my view, I think we need a better indication. I think a number of people have talked about going back and having another look to see if we can achieve something that's more helpful to us all to make a judgment about. Now, Steve, if you'd like to come in at this point.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I know there's been some comments about possible removal of that first floor extension in its entirety, but I think in general the panel are accepting of some form of extension on the roof. We're concerned about the materials and the design. And I think if members could confirm that, then I think that would be a good point to actually perhaps change the recommendation again and actually defer it for us to discuss in detail the actual design and the materials for the extension. It also gives us the opportunity to flesh out the other conditions better. I must say the applicant did submit some better 3D drawings at the very last minute this morning, but trying to be consistent, often I won't recommend that late submissions are given to the panel because the people don't have the opportunity to see them, so I kept them off. So I think if it was deferred on the basis that members are accepting that a first floor extension could be acceptable, but subject to getting the materials and the design right.
And clearer images, Steve, I think, for us to make judgments about.
I think it would therefore be appropriate to defer it on that basis, and we'll go back and tidy up the conditions as well, because there was an awful lot of information that was thrown around at the very last minute. I hope that helps.
Well, it helps me. I mean, I think I'd be more comfortable doing that than pushing the debate today when I don't think we've got sufficient information in front of us. Panel, can I ask you the question then? Would you be happy to defer with a view to it coming back to panel?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so
Yes, Chair.
just do the thumbs up if you're okay with that, and then I can get a quick visual. Yeah, okay. I think we can agree that, Steve. So do we need somebody to make a proposal now?
So I've muted myself.
You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. Just to make absolutely clear, it's on the basis that we're actually going back to the developer to negotiate on some form of first floor extension, but the materials and the design need to be better. I just want to be clear, because I know there were comments about removing it altogether, but I'm not sure that was the panel's majority view. So if that's the point, then yes, you need to defer and delegate both, Chair, because there's two applications, don't forget, with it being a listed building and a planning application.
Yeah, so both applications, what we're proposing is that both applications are deferred for further negotiation with the developer with regards to both design and materials. Is that what people are happy with? Back to panel. So that is the majority of people. So thank you. We'll agree on that, Steve.
Chair, somebody needs to sort of move that and second it, and also take a list of the voting, because I think Councillor Brooks
I'll propose, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Reagan. Will anybody second that?
Yeah, happy to do so, Chair.
Thank you. All of those, I'll go down the list. So if you say you support or don't support the proposal, Councillor Anderson.
Support.
Councillor Brooks.
Just for clarification, Chair, if it's deferred and delegated, does that mean that the principle of a second story extension is accepted by panel?
Chair, I'm not asking for it to be delegated.
Deferred.
We were initially, but obviously taking the feeling from the panel, that's not the way that members are going with this.
Okay, so it's going to come back to panel.
Yes, it will come back to panel.
Yeah,
that's fine.
Okay,
then.
So you're supporting Councillor Brooks? Yeah.
Yes.
Councillor Campbell.
Support.
Councillor Finnegan.
Give him a ring now. Give him a ring now.
I can't.
Whilst you're talking, give him a ring.
Somebody's left their mute off. Somebody's
still happy to support.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton.
Support.
Councillor Heselwood.
Support, Chair.
Councillor Reagan.
Support.
Councillor Shemilt.
Support.
Councillor Ray.
Support.
And I support too. So I think that's unanimous, Andy.
Yep. Everybody in favour.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Well, that brings us to the end of that item, and I'm sure when it comes back, we'll have a much longer debate. Thank you. Do you want to sum up, Steve, just for clarity in the minutes and the recording?
I think I'd better do, Chair, and that an alternative motion was passed to defer the application for further discussion with the applicant regarding the first floor extensions, design, materials, but also to give officers the opportunity to flesh out the other late conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So now we move on to agenda item 11, the Kirkstall Forge application. Richard, you've had a long wait, but thank you for being here.
Chair, thank you. Good afternoon, members. This is the application, which is presentation to your report pack, agenda item 11, commencing at page 103. And this is for the variation of conditions 12, which is the completion of the eastern and western accesses, and 13, which is the provision of a bus route of approval 1504824 to amend the wording of these conditions. Next slide, please, Toby. This scale 1 to 9,000 slides shows the extent of the Kirkstall Forge site. It's subject to the outline application I've just mentioned, 1504824. And apologies, Chair, if I keep having to read out references, but it's important that we're clear on what we're varying. Next slide, please, Toby. This scale 1 to 7,000 slide shows the red line boundary of the site a bit closer. The site extends to nearly 23 hectares of land, broadly rectangular, set southwest of the A65 Abbey Road, where it's accessed directly off the western access. A further eastern access point also exists to the opposite far end of the site as the secondary future access. surrounding housing to the northeast includes those within the LS5 postcode known as the Abbeydales, the Vespers, and the Hawksworth Wood Estate. Next slide, please, Toby. The site also includes other key routes through it and alongside it, namely the River Aire, the Leeds Shipley/Ilkley railway line, including the 2016 opened Kirkstall Forge station itself, and the Leeds-Liverpool Canal. Other than the railway line and the railway station and the new internal link road connecting it with the A65, the site currently contains plot J1, also known as Kirkstall Forge number 1, an office building of just over 15,000 square metres. Next slide, please, Toby. Within the Kirkstall Forge site itself, the estate so far currently consists of that office plot J1, which is set adjacent to the railway line and the railway station itself. The western access to the Kirkstall Forge estate is shown in the top left of this plan, and the route of the adopted internal spine road, Butler's Wharf, runs from this point to the office building itself and the railway station in the southeast corner. Next slide, please. This slide shows the wider Kirkstall Forge master plan for the current, forthcoming and future phases of development. As many of the members here today will recall from the last South and West Plans panel of the 28th of January, a further application has been approved for reserve matters to plots E and F for 213 dwellings, as set to the northeast of the river. Aside from existing building J1 and the train station, the only other current development consists of the 2 prototype houses set just to the northern tip of what we call the stitch within these plots E and F. These were actually finished during 2020 as part of a previous reserve matters approval, and the houses are set alongside an initial length of middle spine road to E and F called Isabella Avenue. And these have been delivered and occupied on site since completion, and this is to allow the applicant CG to market test this part of their designs. Aside from plots J1 and E and F, I also highlight the following plots, and this is particularly the subject of this application, which align the land between the railway line and the river. So from left to right, these are residential plots K1, K2, office plots K3, K4, and residential plots J3, J4. The applicants consider the combination of residential plots E and F and J3, J4 alongside office plot K3 is crucial to having a critical mass of development set around this stitch area to generate sufficient revenues for outstanding infrastructure. This includes the Eastern Access Road to come forward in the short and medium term. The delivery of plots K3, K4 is a £16 million capital investment project with approximately 415 full-time equivalent jobs expected to be created. The applicants outlined that they expect a further 460 indirect full-time equivalent jobs to be supported during construction. Once built, these plots K3, K4 would be seen to provide and accommodate over 2,000 new jobs on the site and the creation of up to 995 full-time equivalent indirect jobs across the wider region. The delivery of commercial plots K3, K4 within this mixed-use allocated site is considered strategically important and aligns with core strategy policy SP8, in particular, key substantial and sustainable economic development objectives within the NPPF. Also, as this is a mixed-use site, allocated site that is, the timely delivery of sustainable housing component within Kirkstall Forge is strongly supported through the core strategy. The SAP allocation has initially identified that the site can offer nearly 1,400 housing units, and being sustainably located, this is an important strategic consideration in the timely delivery of these units within the planned period. Next slide, please, Toby.
Sorry, just before you move on to the next slide, Chair, I did put my hand up to ask. You're talking about K1, 2, oh. Have you got a cursor that you could use to show? Because I can't make them out. You know,
if you can just
when you were talking about, yeah, please.
Yeah, I'm hoping that it might be a time delay, but hoping that's coming through. That's circling over K1, K2.
Oh, no.
I can't see it, Richard. Oh, yes, I can. Yeah, it is on there.
Yes, I can see it now. Yeah. Yes, please. Okay. Can you point them out again for me, please?
Yep. So K1 and K2 are just on the left-hand side, but in between the railway line and the river. And then you've got K3, K4, just to the right of that. And then you've got what we call the stitch. And then you've got, to the right of the stitch, you've got building J1. And then to the right of that, you've got the other plots that I mentioned, J3, J4.
Thank you.
Hopefully that's coming through. It's a bit more difficult online as opposed to having the red the red functionality at Merrin. At Civic Hall. I'll move on, Toby. If you can go back to that plan, that's great. Thank you. So the site includes the other key routes I mentioned through it. Just bear with me, just get back to the right slide. And just returning to the application proposal itself, and specifically that of the two junctions connecting with the A65 and the internal spine road through the site between the two. These are the existing the existing western and the future eastern junctions. These are the junctions concerned with conditions 12 and 13 to be varied. As you will note, part of the internal spine road, Butler's Wharf, has been delivered and is present within the western part of the site. Next slide, please, Toby. This photograph shows the western junction providing access to Kirkstall Forge upon approach from the A65 when travelling southeast bound towards Kirkstall. Next slide, please, Toby. This photograph shows the eastern junction upon approach from the A65, but this time travelling northwest bound towards Horsforth. The existing access can provide construction access, and a security cabin, porter cabin presence is already provided just beyond the hoardings to the site here. Next slide, please. This slide shows the extent of the adopted road in grey from the western junction down to office building J1 and the railway station. Kirkstall Forge is a complex site for development with a number of infrastructure and abnormal costs associated to it, and that's beyond the site clearance and preparation costs. This includes two highway junctions and a number of lengthy connecting internal roads, a flood relief channel, and significant contaminated land remediation costs amongst them. To date, some £97 million has been committed and invested by the applicant into the regeneration of Kirkstall Forge, to which only 30%, that's 29 million, has been invested in a building, i.e. plot J1, that generates any form of income. Examples of this expenditure include £6 million on remediation earthworks, £6 million on roads, bridges and drainage, and £9 million in river walls, utilities and flood alleviation. Included within these figures is £15 million spent within the first phase of infrastructure to allow plot J1 to successfully operate. The applicants highlight that 70% of the costs, close to 70 million, has been invested in the site. It is crucial that the project and the wider estate development can now start to receive more revenue in order for the additional investment in the future to facilitate the further supported infrastructure, i.e. the eastern junction and the continuation of the spine road to be delivered. Included in the £97 million is 7.1 million, which is required to deliver the infrastructure works that will enable the delivery of the approved residential plots E and F, the 213 homes, and plots J3, J4, 425 homes. Loan funding has been initially provided, or initially shown to be provided to assist in this required infrastructure delivery work, and this has in principle been secured from Homes England, initially to be drawn down up to the 31st of March this year. However, the lender has outlined that this is subject to confirmation of the variation of these particular conditions beyond this initial housing delivery.
Sorry, Chair, can I interject a moment? The printout that I've got here and the slide that I can see, I can't actually read what anything says on it.
Richard, is there any of that written information which we need is essential for us to understand what you're saying?
It's essentially, this is a highways plan that was used as part of the extent of the works to be adopted by Leeds City Council, and the key thing really is that you see the grey road, the road that goes from the existing western junction all the way down into the railway station. That's the area that's been adopted. So that's important to know in terms of the expenditure that's been invested and what essentially serves Kirkstall Forge at the moment in terms of road infrastructure anyway.
Can you use the cursor, Richard, so we can see?
Yeah, I'll
please?
try. Is it coming through?
No. Oh, yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it was for a minute. Perhaps if you go slower.
Yeah. Is that coming through?
No. So if you can't use the cursor, just explain it as clearly as you can, please.
Yeah. Okay. So so you got the Western Junction at the very top left of the corner of the plan that you saw the photo of, and then that sweeps down and it goes towards the southeast, and it sweeps what we call into Butler's Wharf, which is the name of the road, and it goes around. It goes across the river first, and it goes around building J1, and it actually comes, and where you see it end at that point is adjacent to the railway station. There's a small section of yellow or sort of lighter colour. That is what we call a temporary road surface, which is actually not that's actually not adopted as such, but that is actually part of the road circulation that goes back onto that grey infrastructure that we have adopted. Is that clearer?
Is that clearer, Councillor Brooks?
Yeah, I suppose so, Chair. I suppose in future, when documents are being included in slides, can it be made sure that they can be read properly?
Thank you. That's very helpful. Yeah, we will.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the quality of that plan is not great. So Toby, if you can go on to the next slide from that one. Thank you. So the current wording of the conditions are shown within this slide. It is based upon a formula which restricts various combinations of office and residential development coming forward prior to the construction of the Eastern Junction. The conditions which flow from some of the original wording within the application 2496/05OT, that was the original approved outline in July 2007 and prior to the global financial crash, relates to the construction of the two junctions, which at this time it was uncertain which junction would be delivered first. The wording of the conditions was then altered within the subsequent application 11/1400 EXT, and this was approved in April 2014. By that point, the Western Junction was being delivered first to commitment from the various parties to ensure that both a flagship building was created on the site alongside the new railway station. The conditions in April 2014 then referred to a threshold of 450 for the maximum figure permissible in calculation of the Eastern Junction and when that would be delivered. The conditions above that you see in the slide are taken from the current relevant consent, which is the 15/04824, which updated those of the April 2014 consent, and this was approved in December 2015. And all these application details are within the relevant history of the report pack. At that time, in December 2015, some of the conditions as varied included 12 and 13, and that was to raise the threshold to a figure of 884 from the previous 450 that were used to calculate when the Eastern Junction would come forward. Next slide, please, Toby. The new conditions recommended are subject of the proposed variation are outlined within this slide. This is now based on a more specific maximum quantum of development, which has been calculated through both existing and proposed traffic and travel data.
Just for clarity, these are the conditions that are in the recommendation of your report. If you can't read that slide, they are in the recommendation of the report. Sorry to interrupt you, Richard. It's a complex presentation.
That's fine, Chair. Yes, no, you're quite right. These are conditions in the recommendation box. So these are now based on a more specific maximum quantum of development, which has been calculated through both existing proposed traffic and travel data. The occupation since 2016 of plot J1 has allowed for traffic survey data of this office building to be gathered. And that's up until September 2019, i.e. prior to the current pandemic. and reflective of otherwise expected conventional traffic levels associated with office workplaces. In respect to the 838 dwellings referenced in both conditions that you see on the wording, this equates to the 213 units approved at plots E and F, the 425 units expected at plots J3, J4, and 200 units at plots K1, K2. In respect of condition 12, for the delivery of the new Eastern Junction, the 25,954 square metres of maximum commercial floor space in office use relates to the existing plot J1 and also that of what we call plot K3, which is the one part of the reserve matters consent that's approved in May 2020 for the two office buildings K3, K4 and its multi-storey car park. The second threshold, the 35,549 figure that you see, referenced in both condition 12, relating to the design work around the Eastern Junction and the access road, and condition 13 for the actual delivery of the associated bus route, relates to the aforementioned plots, along with, in addition, the other outstanding plot K4, the other part of the office reserve matters in 2019. In terms of condition 13, and as an update to the report pack, this latest form of suggested condition wording in the variation proposed has been communicated with the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, who state that this latest version looks stronger with respect to public transport running through the site. Lastly, on this slide, you will note reference to an additional condition. This relates to additional highway-related improvements, and these are discussed in the forthcoming slides. Next slide, please, Toby. Back principally to condition 12, this slide shows the basis of the daily highway analysis and the modelling work around the Highways Authority consideration of what would form an accepted maximum quantum of development that could be taken off the Western Junction safely and efficiently at this point in time. This is based on saturation levels predicted being no higher than 90% of the junction's designed capacity, and this allows for the delivery of plots J1, the office, E and F, the residential, J3, J4, residential again, K1, K2, residential again, and plot K3, office, taken together. If plot K4 was also to come forward off this junction, it would only be based upon ongoing evidence of the junction's ability to operate successfully and efficiently as the other plots start to provide travel data sets. Next slide, please, Toby. The additional condition I mentioned previously in the previous slides references to 3 highway improvements which will be secured through the approval of this application over and above anything else within the current December 2015 consent as it currently stands. The first improvement is shown here as outlined within this slide, which shows some white lining alterations that will be undertaken to ensure the Western Junction is designed more efficiently, further enhancing its ability to accommodate larger volumes of traffic at peak periods in particular. Next slide, please, Toby. The second additional benefit relates to the provision of a new pedestrian link from the A65 by the way of an opening within the existing brick boundary wall, indicatively designed to step down gradually as shown in the zigzag style. I'm hoping again you can see that on your plans. You can see the zigzagonal style just at the top from the road down into the pocket park. And this is taken sensitively through the wooded area and into the pocket park contained within the stitch area, where it's set within plots E and F as approved under the last reserve matters before the January panel. This will enable quicker and enhanced pedestrian access for both incoming residents of these plots to various facilities and the local shops services, and also for the neighbouring communities of Kirkstall and Hawksworth if wishing to access the train station or facilities within Kirkstall Forge. This is strongly supported as this will benefit many, although it's accepted, noted and recognised that at this stage, due to the gradients and topography involved, wheelchair and pushchair access will still be required via the Western Junction for the time being at least, although this is no change from the present. The concept behind this route is that it will further encourage better and more sustainable connections of the development and the train stations to the neighbouring communities via walking and buses along the A65. This is a particularly welcome feature and will reduce overall walking travel distances from the existing and new plots emerging and the train station to key local services and facilities on a much more aligned basis with current accessibility guidelines for new development in the core strategy. Of interest, the current ratio for walking trips within the total overall percentage of trips made by users, as surveyed in January 2018, was 24.6%. It is expected that the additional measures suggested here would further encourage and increase the numbers of pedestrian movements to those using the train station. Indeed, it's noted from the Office of Rail and Road Statistics that suggests the railway station was used by 54.7% more users in 2019 than it was in 2018. Next slide, please, Toby. This slide shows the route alignment and the careful, sensitive design through the woodlands above plots E and F's Pocket Park. This is good design, good placemaking, creating added sustainable connections and benefiting the local community and incoming residents, businesses alike. Next slide, please, Toby. This photograph shows where the new pedestrian access point will be taken, just a bit further to the right of the lighting column. Further to the southeast, an existing pedestrian refuge island within the road is sited near to the Abbeydale Way junction with the A65. This provides pedestrians with an existing crossing facility if accessing the residential communities in this area. To the northwest, in the opposite direction at the western junction, there is an existing pelican crossing facility to use if required when crossing the A65 in that particular broad direction. Next slide, please, Toby. Additionally, as a third improvement, and also in respect of current guidance, in this case, the Street Design Guide, the proposal also more formally conforms that should emergency access ever be required from the eastern access as opposed to the western junction, i.e. perhaps this might be during peak periods with responders coming from the east, for example, this would be made available via the current unadopted internal road arrangements linking the eastern end of the site to Butler's Wharf, should this be desired by the emergency services and in advance of obviously the future eastern junction being brought forward. So to sum up, Chair, next slide, please, Toby. To sum up, Chair, this application is considered to provide the appropriate balance between the expedited delivery of the next phases of housing and office plots. And whilst this would essentially be from the Western Junction in the short term, this alteration to the existing restrictive conditions is considered would allow for a more evenly distributed loading of infrastructure to the overall development costs and expedited delivery of housing and employment in the short term. The ability to more quickly deliver this much supported housing and economic investment at Kirkstall Forge will in turn, it is hoped, generate the revenues required to support the delivery of the circa £9 million Eastern Junction and Access Road. So the application supports sustainable economic and housing growth whilst at the same time protects highway safety and efficiency. Therefore, Chair, the recommendation is to approve the variation on a defer and delegate basis because there's a deed of variation involved based on the suggested condition wording outlined in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Richard. And although it is unusual to interject while the presentation's going on, and I appreciate that colleagues needed to, I can just apologise to you. I can only see 3 people other than the speaker when the presentation is up. So I missed your indications and I apologise for causing you to have to interject like that. Okay, we have no speakers on this item. So I'd like to invite questions to officers straight away, please. Councillor Ray.
Just as a kind of executive summary, because that was a lot, and I must admit I'm going to need a coffee after that. How you read that, and it was like Star Trek. Basically, what we're saying is conditions need to be varied in order to deliver what needs to be done in line with the funding requirements. Is that basically the layman term of it? Effectively.
I'll let the officer respond first. Richard?
Yes, I mean, essentially that's a fairly reasonable summary. There is some Homes England funding that's crucial here to deliver their requirements of just over 500 homes, which is the key point of the funding to be obtained or drawn down by the 31st of March. The applicants do consider that as part of this variation of conditions that we need to just look a bit beyond that to get what we call the critical mass of development to help further actually deliver that Eastern Junction, Eastern Access Road in a quicker timescale than obviously the current revenues from the existing building J1 would obviously allow. So essentially, in summary, that is correct. The funding relates more to what we call plots E and F and plots J3, J4. But the variation conditions would go a little bit further than that and would allow for some more development off that western junction, but not to a point which jeopardises the highway safety and efficiency of that junction.
So basically, the second access was due to come forward at an earlier stage, and the developer now finds that in order to draw down the Homes England money, the residential has to be completed, and actually a little bit of the other development needs to be completed in order to generate sufficient income to do the second access and the road. The second access and the road are absolutely crucial. So these recommendations are designed to ensure that they are delivered as described here, and there's no way that the developer can say, well, we can't do it after all, because that would be unacceptable. I don't know whether Andy wants to come in at this point and just explain about the traffic element of this and what caused you to conclude as you have, Andy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll try and explain it in layman's terms.
Thank you.
But I think the big change is that up to the application in the 15 application that Richard referred to, all the traffic assessments were based on the theoretical traffic generation that was determined at the original outline approval stage, and basically the initial condition allowed a certain amount of traffic to be generated, but when in 15 we're at the position where we had more certainty over building J1 and what was then going to be the first phase of residential, and the amount of traffic allowed by the initial conditions didn't allow for that quantum of development, but it wasn't a huge step to tweak those conditions to allow for that additional quantum of development to allow J1 and the first phase of development to occur. So subsequently to that, perhaps I should say that the office development is probably the key element insofar as the volume of traffic that it generates. So more recently, the office building J1 has been built and occupied, and there's been both transport traffic counts done at the western access and travel plan survey work done, and that's given us some more certainty over actually the traffic that the office buildings are generating rather than the initial hypothetical assumptions. So that's allowed us to take that if you like survey traffic data forward, and through using that data allowed us to reassess the junction to work out how much development traffic can pass through it. So that's why we've apparently gone from quite a big step in terms of the development that was allowed under the 15 application up to the current day, and we're in a position where the level of development that we're recommending is acceptable. We'll take the junction up to 90% of its capacity on the worst affected arms. So it's figures that the council's content with. But if we then add in the additional office building, it takes it up nearly to full capacity, which we're not comfortable with at the moment. But obviously it does give a period of time for further settling in of J1 and actually a new office building to be built and occupied, and travel patterns for that office building understood as well. So it would allow further assessment in the future. But at the moment we're in a position where we've got traffic flows based on data on the site that we feel comfortable with to take forward.
And as Richard said, the minor alteration to the western access, what it does is it just increases the length that traffic can queue in 2 lanes towards the junction, and that just slightly increases the capacity of the junction, and that again is just necessary to allow it to function as we wish.
So in short, whereas the developer wanted to do all of the residential and both of the office blocks before commencing the road, they're now wanting to do just one of the office blocks and the residential in order to make the traffic more manageable. However, it is absolutely crucial that that second road and junction does appear at the time stated. So, Richard, can you just tell us how these conditions ensure that that road will be built?
Yeah, okay, thanks, Chair. So, yeah, within the wording of the conditions that we've been obviously looking at with the applicants, it allows essentially for a point where you get to 90% occupancy on those particular buildings that we've mentioned, whereby then the design work for the new Eastern Junction, Eastern Access Road has to be submitted for obviously our approval. It's not a light touch piece of work. It's a £9 million piece of infrastructure, and all of the plots off the eastern side will all flow from that. So it's a very difficult, tricky piece of work to understand in terms of the land levels and the geometry, and you have to be absolutely pretty certain as to how you're going to develop that eastern side before you can deliver that particular access road, or certainly design it. So the current conditions or the proposed conditions will allow us to oversee that and hopefully in a timely manner prior to obviously full occupation of those buildings. And that's obviously built into the conditions that you've got proposed today. But at the same time, the crucial thing is that the work that myself and Andy have been doing with the applicant is that we've got a group of buildings which would not take the Western Junction over capacity in our consideration, unless obviously, and that might change unless obviously the data comes forward that shows continuing improvements in travel planning and travel patterning, which we are seeing gradually at Kirkstall Forge. We are seeing increasing modal shift onto public transport. We certainly were before the pandemic anyway. So we are going in the right direction. So hopefully over time, that data can be built up, and if it can be understood, there might be an opportunity to allow the other office buildings to come forward as well. But certainly in the short term, it means that we can deliver the buildings, and we can then safeguard the future of the Eastern Junction to come forward under our design before the full occupation of those buildings.
Thank you, Richard. And also, we don't have speakers on this, but we do have Dominic Crowley, Nick Lee, Tony Armstrong, Gareth Chambers, David Bell and Thomas Bone here from the developers representing them, and so they can be brought forward for some questions if that's necessary. So can I invite members of the panel now to ask any questions they'd like to ask? Can't see a single hand. Any comments that anybody would like to offer? Councillor Campbell.
Well, Chair, I would recommend, I would commend officers on the brevity of their description this afternoon. I'm okay with this. I think times change, circumstances change. We need to be flexible on this development. It is a large development. There's a lot going on down there. I would just, however, like to stick in a comment stroke suggestion in relation to cycle access. I appreciate that the Eastern Junction will not be built as soon as perhaps we hoped it would be. But it seems to me that if we're making access for emergency vehicles, we ought to be able to make access for cyclists as well. And I wonder if officers could look at the provision of a cycle access point where that junction's going. And I also, because a keen cyclist is contacting me about how you get from this development onto the canal towpath. And so again, could officers look at how that link works in terms of cycling as opposed to pedestrians? So with those 2 points, I'm fine with this, Chair.
Thank you. Would officers like to respond to the cycling question? If not, I'll invite one of the representatives to come forward. If anybody would like to.
Yeah, I can make some points on that, Chair, if that's okay.
Yes, that's fine, Richard.
So yeah, we can certainly look at that. There is some initial funding that's been accrued to develop a cycling link from the Abbey grounds up through some of the woodlands to the eastern side of Kirkstall Forge. It has gone through quite a lot of discussion with local ward members and the applicants, etc., so that we take the most sensitive routes, but it is a requirement as part of the original legal obligations within the original outline. So that's been worked up, and actually we were getting quite making a lot of headway on that actually, although because of the local connections with the some of the interested parties, certainly with the Abbey grounds, it was taking a little bit more time just to ensure that the local community were happy with the designs that Sustrans were doing on that. And I think unfortunately due to one or two illnesses within the parks and countryside section, it's been a bit slower in being delivered, but that's mainly at our end rather than the applicant's end. Obviously the only issue, but we can certainly look at it, the only issue with the eastern side is one of the intentions of the applicant was obviously to use the eastern side as a construction access and to separate the health and safety issues that you get with construction from the public. So we just need to look at that a little bit closer if we did with cycling access. But I'm sure, and obviously with the applicants here, they can speak on their behalf, but I'm sure we can certainly look into that a little bit further if that's helpful.
Did you want to come back, Councillor Campbell, or is that an old hand?
No, I will come back. I appreciate what everybody's saying, but I think the point is that I am anyway, expressing a view that I think we ought to be able to do this. And it's not really a case of constantly saying why we can't do it, but actually, I suppose from my point of view, how we could do it. And I think if it's an aspiration of the panel to create this cycle link, and I think in the long term it is, then I don't see any reason why we shouldn't look at that now, notwithstanding that there may be issues, but certainly as far as possible to provide it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think we've all been lobbied by cyclists to say that this needs to be a bit more cycle friendly, actually. Not that we've, formally spoken to them in any way, but I just wonder if any of those representing the applicant could give us some sort of assurance that you could perhaps look again at cycle access and perhaps talk to the public a little bit about your plans and see if you can accommodate what's required in that respect. It would be very much in keeping, would it not, with the principles of the development. Is there anybody who could speak on that?
Yeah, can I just...
Yes, Chair.
Steve, I think you wanted to come in first.
Yeah, sorry, it's been an awful lot of information, hasn't it, for the members. I just wanted to, I think it's fair to say that all we're really trying to do here is delay for a little while the construction of the eastern access, to put it very succinctly. So yes, we can look at the access arrangement for cyclists, but really it's not for this application, but it's certainly something we can take forward with when we're just doing the design of the junction. Is that a fair comment?
As long as the applicant's representatives accept that can be done. Nobody's coming forward.
Yes, Chair, my name's Nick Lead, Development Director at CG. We're happy to explore that as per has been suggested.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can I also just explain, and maybe this is some good feedback, but we can go away and look at signage. Access to the canal is available via the lift over the railway line on the station platform, but from memory, it isn't signposted. So maybe that's something we can take away from these comments.
Thank you, Nick. Any more questions from members? Mr. Councillor Campbell.
Oh, you can call me Mr. What Mr. Butler said is not quite what I said. I think we ought to be looking at that cycle access prior, in effect, to the design construction of the of the eastern access, because that could be some time away. And I think actually we ought to be looking at the possibility, because it's not such a big piece of work to get cycles through there. And if the developers, as they seem to be, are willing to have a look at that, I think we ought to accept that and move that forward rather than waiting until all this has gone through. We're actually at the eastern access stage. That's just my views, Chair.
Do you want to comment on that again, Nick?
I hear what the frustration is, and connectivity is, of course, extremely important. We ourselves are very keen to see the eastern access come forward because of those improved connectivity to the east and to Abbey Grounds and Kirkstall. I think the point that's been made in the officer's report is our main concern, notwithstanding Councillor Campbell's points. It is quite a substantial distance between the eastern access junction point and the existing river crossing. And it is used for construction, both for compounds and for deliveries. And we will be very concerned about combining public access with those construction activities. We are actively working with Sustrans, not just about the current link between the IB Grounds and the A65, but also what that future link might look like once the Eastern Access Road is available. But to appropriately surface, secure and light a cycleway through a construction site would be something I'd be very concerned about. But hearing Councillor Campbell's point about it's not always about what you can't do, it's what you can do, we're happy to revisit it. I think it would be very difficult to make that commitment today.
Yes, I think we're just asking for the commitment to revisit and think about it, please, Nick. Yeah. Councillor Heselwood.
I just wanted to ask if when Nick suggested the sign regarding being able to get from the side of the canal over the footbridge, a sign that would be really helpful, because I do go walking along the canal there and then come over the footbridge and through the development quite a lot, because our ward is by the canal, Bramley Ward, and that's Bramley Falls Wood just there. And I do go up and down there quite a lot with my children and come over, and it is, people don't realise that you can actually get through there and then through Hawksworth Wood or down Kirksall Road, and it is a really good walk, especially at the moment when we're not allowed very far. So if we could commit to putting some kind of signage up, so people know that that's there, I think that would, until things move on, I think that would be a really good idea, that people, because there is a very easy path to follow, and you're up by the canal and you can cycle right into the centre of Leeds that way. So I think if we could put a sign up there, that'd be really helpful and would really help in the interim.
Thank you, Councillor Heselwood. So we're on to comments and views on the issue about the construction of the road and the development. Are there views about this recommendation? Is there anybody who would be prepared to propose the recommendation?
I'll propose it, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Ray. Do I have a seconder?
Yeah, I'll second it, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Reagan. So I'll go down the list again and we'll vote in favour or against the recommendation, please. Councillor Anderson?
Approve.
Councillor Brooks?
In favour, Chair.
Councillor Campbell? Is he gone? I think I saw him walk away. He's there.
Sorry, I pressed the wrong button again, Chair. In favour.
Councillor Finnegan?
In favour.
Councillor Hamilton?
In favour.
Councillor Heselwood?
In favour.
Councillor Reagan?
In favour.
Councillor Shemilt. Are you on mute again, Councillor Shemilt?
Oh, sorry. In favour. Sorry.
And Councillor Ray.
In favour.
And I'm in favour as well. So again, Andy, I think that was a unanimous approval. Thank you very much indeed. Steve, for the record.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the motion to, or recommendation rather, to vary the conditions has been agreed, deferred and delegated, subject to the completion of a deed of variation on the 106, and we will pursue obviously the signage that Nick offered, and the further discussions about whether we can bring forward at all possible the cycling links. Although I do take his point about mixing construction traffic with cyclists, being a cyclist myself.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, that concludes our formal business, but it doesn't conclude all our business, because I do want to say a word or two about Andy Fickett, our highways representative. This will be Andy's last meeting because he is retiring at the end of this month. And you have been on this committee and many others that I sit on, Andy, since I first became a member of the council. You will be very, very sorely missed. Your personality and your jokes, as well as the contributions that you make, will be very greatly missed from this team. And we know that we've put you in some fairly sticky situations, and we've asked you to explain yourself on many occasions, which you've risen to. And you know, as I say, we will miss you. And I think it's a real shame that we're having to say goodbye to you as a little square photograph on a screen. It would have been much nicer in person, and we could have had cakes, but of course we can't do that in this situation. So thank you for all your years of service with us and all your support, and we wish you the very, very best retirement possible. I don't know whether you'd like to say just a couple of words about your intentions or your feelings. Don't feel obliged to.
No, thank you, Chair. I must say it's all. I think it's quite a privilege as an officer to serve on panel, and it's something that I have enjoyed, for, as you say, for quite a number of years. And yes, I've taken all the jibes that people like to throw at highways and transportation on my shoulders through that period. And but yes, yeah, we've seen some good applications go through, and it is a very grounding experience for officers, I think, to hear what panels have to say and take that back to the teams and hope that they can learn from it. So yes, so this is my last South and West panel. For those that serve on City Centre, I'll see you next Thursday. But,
okay, well, can we show our thanks in the usual way? Thank you, Andy.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much indeed. And can I thank everybody for their attendance? It's been a long meeting this afternoon, and thank you so much for being here and giving your judgments and coming to conclusions. Much appreciated, and I'll see you at the next panel.
Thank you,
Chair.
Could officers stay just for a moment, please?